The thing in the freight cage had stopped screaming 2 days ago, and everyone on the Sabak Reach agreed that was worse. A screaming Vurox meant a Vurox with fight left in it, and a Vurox with fight left in it stayed behind 8 centimeters of ferroglass where it belonged. This one had gone quiet. It lay on its side in a spread of its own filth on Dock 9, a mountain of gray hide gone slack over the bones, one hind leg swollen to twice its size, and shining wet where the skin had split. Its breath came in long shudders you could feel through the deck plating if you stood close enough. Nobody stood close enough. Kelly had watched 3 shifts of dockhands walk the long way around the cage rather than pass within reach of it, and the cage door had been welded shut since Tuesday, so the long way around was pure superstition. She understood the superstition. She had grown up on stories about the graven beasts of Cressel, the ones the old crews swore could smell your name in your blood, and she had been the junior containment officer who signed the impound order when the derelict hauler came in with this thing chained in its hold, and its handlers scattered across the deck in pieces. She had read the manifest. Class Sovereign Apex Predator, one of maybe 40 left off the death world, worth more than the station that held it and more dangerous than anything the station could do about it. So she signed the order to let it die. That was the humane thing, the veterinary office said. Nobody could sedate it without getting close, and nobody would get close, so it would starve in the cage over 11 or 12 days, and then a hull team in hardsuits would spool it out an airlock, and the Reach would go back to moving cargo. 11 or 12 days. They were on day 9. That was when the human stopped walking. Kelly almost missed it. She was up on the gantry with a cold cup of stim broth going colder in her hand, watching the concourse traffic the way you watch water, and the human was just one more small shape crossing Dock 9 with a mop frame slung over one shoulder. A sanitation contractor, low tier, the sort of body the station chewed through by the 100. He came around the corner of the cage on the long way, same as everyone. Then he stopped. He did not stop the way prey stops. Kelly knew that stop. She had watched 1,000 cadets freeze at the sight of a predator and go stiff and stupid with the wanting to run. This was not that. The human set down his mop frame with the flat clatter of a tool being set down, and he stood at the ferroglass and looked in at the dying thing the way you'd look at a stalled cart, or a leak, or some problem that had gotten into your path and would now have to be dealt with. "Move along," the dock speaker said. It was the automated warning keyed to the cage's proximity ring. "Restricted containment, move along." The human did not move along. He crouched, forearms on his knees, and put his face close to the glass. On the far side of it, the Vurox's slit of an eye rolled and found him, and its lip pulled back off a tooth as long as the human's hand, and a sound came out of it that Kelly felt in her back teeth from 40 meters up. The human did not flinch. He tilted his head, looking at the swollen leg at the wet split in the hide, and he said something too quiet for the gantry mics. Then he stood, picked up his mop frame, and walked off toward the sanitation lockers at a pace that was not quite a hurry. Kelly put down her cold broth. She had the sudden, foolish thought that she ought to log something, and no box on any form she knew of for what she'd log. His name was Arlo Vance, and he was 19, and he had been on the Sabak Reach for 4 months and 11 days, which was long enough to know that you did not touch anything you weren't paid to touch. He was not paid to touch the Vurox. He was paid to run the sonic mop over docks 7 through 12 on the graveyard rotation, empty the grease traps, and stay out of the way of everything with a rank tab, which on the Reach was everything. He went to the sanitation locker and filled the 10-liter flush bucket from the reclaimed tap, the potable line, not the gray line, and he carried it back across Dock 9 the short way, which nobody did, and set it down inside the proximity ring where the yellow paint said not to. "Restricted containment," the speaker told him. "Move along." "Hang on," Arlo said, to the speaker or the animal it wasn't clear. He'd seen dying before. That was the thing the aliens didn't understand about him yet, though they would spend the next while learning it in installments. He'd grown up on a wind-scoured lease in the Karoo Highlands where his family ran meat goats and a handful of half-feral Anatolian dogs to keep the caracals and the jackals and the occasional wandering hyena honest. And by 19, he had pulled more animals back from the edge than he could count and buried the ones he couldn't. He knew the smell of a wound going septic. He knew the particular stillness of a big animal that had decided to die, because dying had become easier than the alternative, and no one had given it a reason to reconsider. He knew that the first thing you did, before anything else, before you were clever, was water. The cage was welded shut, but it was a freight cage, built to hold cargo, not livestock, and along the base of the ferroglass ran a row of drainage slots the width of 2 fingers, for washing cargo down. Arlo tipped the bucket and let a thin, bright rope of water run through the nearest slot and pool on the deck inside, an arm's length from the animal's muzzle. The Vurox did not move. Its eye tracked the water, then tracked him. "Not asking you to trust me," Arlo said. His voice was flat and low and unhurried, a voice for spooked animals, a voice his grandfather had used and his grandfather before that. "Not asking you to like it. Water's there. Do what you want." He sat down on the deck, outside the ring now at an angle where he wasn't square to the thing, wasn't looming, wasn't staring. He looked at the middle distance and he waited, the way you wait out a frightened dog, the way you wait out a horse that's decided the gate is going to eat it. He had nowhere better to be. His shift didn't start for an hour. It took 11 minutes. He counted them the way he counted everything, out of habit. At minute 11, the great gray head dragged itself forward across the filth, one hand span, then another, and the black lips folded back, and a tongue the size of a bath towel came out and touched the water, and the animal drank. It drank for a long time. When it finished, it did not thank him, because it was an animal and animals do not thank you, and Arlo would have distrusted it if it had. It laid its head back down in the puddle it had made, and its huge ribs went up and down, and its eye stayed open and stayed on him. "There," Arlo said. He got up and his knees popped and he picked up his mop frame. "I'll bring more." He did not notice the containment officer up on the gantry, 40 meters up, standing very still with a cold cup in her hand, and her membrane ears flared all the way out. He noticed almost nothing about how strange he was being, because to him he was not being strange at all. He was being a person who had walked past a dying animal and found, as he always did, that he could not. The betting pool opened before the end of the shift. It was Doff who opened it, a squat sulphur-skinned Bren who ran the dock crew's off-book book and would put odds on anything with an uncertain outcome, and the uncertain outcome here was how many days the human would last. Doff set the line at 4. 4 days before the graven thing took his arm off through the drainage slot, or before the human wised up and quit going near it, whichever came first, and the smart money went early and heavy on 2. Kelly heard about the pool the way she heard about everything, which was late and from a subordinate. She did not put money in. She went instead to the veterinary office, which was one Corlin named Thren and a cabinet of sedative darts nobody could deliver, and she leaned in the hatch and said, "The impound on 9. Somebody's watering it." Thren's fronds went still. Thren was old and careful and had been the one to write the humane death recommendation, and Thren did not like surprises in a file that was supposed to be closing. Watering it how? Through the wash slots, a sanitation contractor, human. He sat with it for the better part of an hour. And it didn't. It drank. The fronds moved again, slow, the Corlin equivalent of a person rubbing their face. Vurox don't take water from a stranger. Vurox don't take water from their own handlers without a 3-week bonding protocol and a shock collar and a spotter with a rifle. That's not a behavioral quirk, officer. That's the entire literature. Thren pulled the file up on the desk glass, the manifest, the necropsy pre-authorization, the neat little countdown. 9 days without food. It's shutting down. Maybe it hasn't the strength to be dangerous. It made a noise at him, Kelly said. It had the strength to make that noise. Thren looked at her for a while. "Keep an eye on the human," the vet said finally. "When it kills him, I'll want the footage for the incident report, and tell Doff to take my 4 days at 2-1. Kellui went back up to the gantry. She told herself she was keeping an eye on the human because Thren had asked. She was not entirely honest with herself, even then. The truth was that she had signed an order to let a living thing die of hunger because it was too frightening to feed, and some small stubborn part of her had spent 9 days sitting wrong with that. And now, a 19-year-old with a mop had walked up and done the thing she decided was impossible, and she wanted very badly to see what happened next. What happened next was that Arlo came back at the top of every shift and at the bottom of it, and on his meal break in between, and each time he brought the bucket, and on the 3rd visit he brought food. Getting the food was its own small war. The Reach's commissary would not issue raw protein to a sanitation contractor, and the animal feed requisition required a rank tab he did not have. So Arlo did what he had done his whole life when the official channel was closed, which was find the unofficial one. The unofficial one was a galley cook named Pev, a broad, quiet Asim who scraped the trim off the crew's meat ration, the gristle, the organ, the cuts too tough for the officers, into a slop barrel bound for the recyclers, and who did not care in the slightest what a human did with a bucket of it as long as the human hauled the barrel while he was at it. So Arlo hauled the barrel, and Pev looked the other way, and every shift a few kilos of raw trim went not into the recycler, but through the wash slots of the cage on Dock 9. The first time the Vurox would not eat while he watched. Arlo understood that too. He pushed the meat through, sat down at his angle, looked at the middle distance, and when his break was over he got up and left it. When he came back it was gone. The second time it ate a little while he sat, the third time more. By the 5th day, a day past Doff's line, which cost the smart money its shirt and made Doff a small fortune, and moved the new line out to 11. The animal was lifting its head when it heard the particular rhythm of his boots on the deck plating, a sound it had learned and sorted out from all the other boots. And Kellui watched from the gantry as the great slitted eye found the human the moment he came around the corner and stayed on him, not the way a predator tracks a meal, but the way a dog watches the door. She did not have a word for the way that made her feel. Her people had a word for the loyalty of a beast to its master, but this human was not a master. He had no collar, no rifle, no rank, no protocol. He had a bucket and an hour and a flat, quiet voice, and the most dangerous animal in 40 light years had decided, apparently, that these were enough. On the 6th day, the swelling in the hind leg had gone down enough that Arlo could see the wound clearly, and the wound was the real problem. It was a puncture gone to rot deep, the kind of thing that would take the animal even with food and water if it wasn't cleaned. And Arlo knew that. And Arlo knew that cleaning it meant putting his hands through the wash slots and into reach of a mouth that could take him off at the shoulder without trying. He thought about it for one whole shift, then he went to find the vet. Thren heard the knock and expected a subordinate. What arrived in the hatch was a small human in a stained sanitation coverall, holding a mop frame the way a person holds a thing they've forgotten they're holding, and Thren understood at once that this was the one from the footage, the one the whole dock was betting against. "You're the animal doctor," the human said. It wasn't quite a question. "I am the veterinary officer for this station," Thren said, with the small dignity of a professional whose profession is rarely respected. "You're the sanitation contractor who's been feeding my patient. It's not much of a patient if you've written it off to starve." Thren's fronds flattened. It was a fair hit and an unfair one at the same time, and the vet had spent 9 days telling itself the difference. "Do you know what that animal is?" "I know it's got a septic wound in its off hind and maybe 4 days before the rot gets into the blood, and I can't do anything about it," Arlo said. "I've got clean water and I've got trim to keep its strength up. What I haven't got is a way to flush that wound and something to pack it with, and you have both in that cabinet behind you." He shifted the mop frame. I'm not asking you to go near it. I'll go near it. I'm asking you for the kit and 30 seconds telling me what not to do wrong. Thren looked at the cabinet, then at the human, then at the desk glass where the file still said in the flat font of station bureaucracy, humane termination, passive, class sovereign, no intervention authorized. No intervention is authorized, Thren said quietly. Then don't authorize it, Arlo said. Just don't lock the cabinet. There was a long silence in the veterinary office. Out on the docks, a loader klaxon sounded and cut off. Thren was old and careful, and had spent a career doing the recommended thing, the humane thing, the thing that closed the file, and had told itself all those years that the recommended thing and the right thing were the same thing because it was easier to sleep that way. And here was a small mortal creature from a world Thren had never seen, offering to put its bare hands into the mouth of a graven beast to clean a wound that Thren had decided, from a safe distance, was not worth cleaning. Thren turned to the cabinet and opened it. Sterile lavage, this canister, the whole thing, don't be shy with it, the vet said, setting items on the desk with quick, precise movements, not looking at the human, because if it looked at the human it might stop. This is a debriding gel, pack it into the wound, all of it, it'll do the work over a day. This is a broad antimicrobial, it's rated for large xenofauna, 1 ampule into the muscle above the wound. And if you value your arm, you do that last on your way out because it will sting and it will not care that you were trying to help. Thren paused. The mouth. If it opens the mouth all the way and goes still, not the snarl, the stillness, you take your hands out and you do not argue. Do you understand? The snarl is a warning. The stillness is a decision. Arlo took the kid. The snarl is a warning. The stillness is a decision. Yeah, same everywhere, I guess. He left. Thren sat for a long moment looking at the open cabinet and the file that said no intervention. And then, with the slow deliberation of an old creature making a young creature's mistake, the vet reached out and, for the first time in its careful career, marked a file pending re-evaluation when every regulation said to mark it closed. The dock crew came out to watch him do it. They did not come out on purpose, not at first. They came out because someone told someone, and someone else drifted over on a break. And by the time Arlo carried the vet's kit across Dock 9, there were maybe 30 of them ranged along the far rail. Dockhands and loaders and 2 off-duty containment officers and doff with a fresh line already chalked, and up on the gantry Kellui, and none of them said a word. They watched the way people watch a man walk out onto thin ice, half of them wanting him to make it and half of them, if they were honest, wanting the crack. Arlo did not look at them. He knelt at the wash slots and he talked to the animal the whole time, low and even, a running murmur that meant nothing and meant everything, that said only I'm here and I'm not stopping and nothing about this is a surprise. He fed the lavage line through the slot first and let the animal smell it. He fed a strip of trim through after it, a bribe, a courtesy. Then he put his hands through the slot, both of them up to the wrists, into the reach of the mouth, and he began to clean the wound. The Vurox turned its head. Along the far rail 30 people stopped breathing at once, a sound like a valve closing. The great head came around and the black lips peeled and the smell of the animal's breath rolled out through the slots, carrion and copper, and the long teeth were a hand's width from Arlo's bare forearms, and the human did not stop and did not speed up and did not change the low, even nothing he was saying. He flushed the wound. The animal's whole frame shuddered. A growl started up in the enormous chest, a sound below hearing that came up through the deck and into the soles of everyone's feet. I know, Arlo said. I know, nearly done, you're all right. He packed the wound. The growl climbed. Thren, who had come out too and stood a little apart from the crew with its fronds pulled tight, watched the animal's mouth and waited for the stillness, the decision, and its old hearts were going hard. The snarl is a warning. The stillness is a... The mouth closed. The head lowered. The animal put its jaw down flat on the deck plate, a hand's length from the human's hands, and let out a long, shuddering breath, and lay still in the way of a thing that has decided to permit something. Arlo gave it the ampule last above the wound, and it flinched and rumbled and did not turn on him, and then he drew his hands out of the slot slow and clean, and sat back on his heels, and the two of them stayed there a moment, the small human and the mountain of gray hide, breathing. Along the far rail nobody collected on the line. Doff quietly tore it up. Kelly came down off the gantry. She had not meant to. It was not her dock and not her patient and not, strictly, her business, but her feet had carried her down the gantry stair and across Dock 9, while the crew was still drifting off in twos and threes, muttering, not meeting each other's eyes the way people don't after they've watched a thing they'll have trouble explaining at home. She stopped a careful distance from the human, well outside the ring, and the human looked up at her with mild, patient eyes and waited for her to say whatever a rank tab had come to say. "I signed the order," Kelly said. It was not what she had planned to say. "The one to let it die, that was me." "Okay," said Arlo. "You should understand what it is." She had planned this part, at least. "That is a class sovereign predator off Kressel. Its species has killed more of my people than any 3 wars. When the hauler brought it in, its handlers were professionals, bonded to it for years, shock rigs, the whole protocol, and it killed 4 of them in the time it took the 5th to reach an alarm. There is no version of this where it is tame. There is only a version where it is too weak to do what it is. You are feeding it back to strength. You are, do you understand, curing the thing that will kill you." Arlo wiped his hands on his coverall and thought about that with the seriousness she hadn't expected. He did not laugh at her or wave it off. He looked back at the animal, which was watching them both with its head down. "On my world," he said, "we ran dogs to keep the caracals off the goats. Big dogs, Anatolians. You know what an Anatolian is?" She did not. "Course you don't. It's a dog that weighs as much as a grown person and has been bred for 6,000 years to fight things that eat livestock. My grandfather had one name of Captain that killed a leopard on our lease when I was small. Killed it. A leopard," he said it plainly, the way you'd report the weather. "That dog slept in my bed till I was 10, took his supper out of my hand, let me pull thorns out of his feet and pins out of his ears and never once so much as showed me a tooth. Same dog. Killed a leopard and slept in my bed." Kelly's membrane ears drew in. "That is not the same." "No," Arlo agreed. "Captain was smaller." He nodded at the Vurox. "What that is isn't the question that matters. The question that matters is whether it's decided I'm a threat or I'm not, and it's decided I'm not, and it decided that the first day over a bucket of water before it had the strength to be wrong about it. So, it might kill me. Sure. Everything I ever loved could have killed me. That's not a reason to walk past a dying animal." He picked up the empty kit. "That's just where you're from. You walk past. Where I'm from, we don't." He said it without heat, which was the thing that stayed with Kelly afterward. He was not accusing her. He was explaining a difference the way you'd explain that his son was yellow and hers was orange. A fact of origin, nothing to be argued. And she stood there on her own dock, a containment officer with a rank tab and a rifle in the arms locker 40 meters away, and understood for the first time that she came from a species that walked past, and that somewhere out past the edge of everything her people knew, there was a species that did not, and that she had just watched the difference put its bare hands into the mouth of a graven beast and come back with both of them. She went a fine Thren. There was, she thought, a file that badly needed rewriting. The wound turned in 2 days. That was the first thing that broke the crew's certainty for good. Not the drinking, not the feeding, those could be freaks, but the wound. On the morning of the 8th day, the packing Arlo drew out came clean, pink underneath, the rot beaten back, and the animal ate a full ration off the deck and then, for the first time, stood. It stood the way a felled tree would stand if you ran the fall in reverse. It got its forelegs under it, and its head came up, and the great gray bulk of it unfolded off the deck plate until it filled the cage from floor to ceiling ribs, 4 meters at the shoulder, and the dockhands who happened to be on 9 that morning found urgent business elsewhere. It stood and it swayed, weak still, and it looked down through the faro glass at the small human who had been kneeling at its wound, and the human looked up at all 4 meters of it with no expression Kelly could read as fear. "Well," Arlo said, "look at you." The animal took a step. The cage rang. It put its nose to the faro glass in front of the human's face, a slab of black nose the size of the human's whole head, and it breathed him in long, and the human put his hand flat on the glass on his side, and the animal held there, nose to glass, hand to glass, for the length of 3 of its enormous breaths. Thren, watching, made a note in the file it was no longer pretending not to keep. The note said, "Subject demonstrates directed affiliative behavior toward the human absent any conditioning protocol." And then, because it was old and had stopped, somewhere in the last week, being only a careful professional, it added, "Subject is not dangerous to this human. Subject is dangerous to everyone else." These are different findings, and the office should stop confusing them. Overwarden Asuk found the file 3 days later and did not like it. Asuk ran the Sabik reached the way a clamp runs a pipe, by applying uniform pressure to everything and permitting nothing to move that had not been scheduled to move, and a class sovereign predator that had been scheduled to die and was instead, according to the veterinary file, standing up and gaining weight and demonstrating directed affiliative behavior, was very much a thing moving that had not been scheduled to move. Asuk called Thren to the administrative deck, and Kelly because Kelly's name was on the original order, and left the human off the summons because the human was a sanitation contractor, and one did not summon sanitation contractors. "Explain," Asuk said, "why the impound on 9 is not dead." Thren explained. Asuk listened the way a clamp listens. When the vet finished, the overwarden was quiet a moment, its 4 eyes cycling slowly, and then it said the thing that Kelly had been afraid it would say since she first came down off the gantry. "So it's healthy," Asuk said. "You've let a sanitation contractor nurse a class sovereign apex predator back to full health inside my station. You understand what you've done. A dying Vurox is a scheduling problem. A healthy Vurox is a threat to every soul aboard, and now we cannot even claim it died of its wounds because your file, officer, your very thorough file documents that we intervened." Asuk's voice did not rise. That was the frightening thing about Asuk. It never rose. "Sedate it, properly this time, now that it's strong enough to be worth the darts. Sedate it and space it, and close the file the way it should have closed 9 days ago, and I will forget that any of you turned a routine mortality into a liability." "It won't take a dart," Kelly heard herself say. "Then it will take 20. "From who?" And this was the part Kelly hadn't known she believed until it was out of her mouth. "Sir, the only living thing that can get within reach of that animal is the human. Nobody else can approach the cage to deliver a dart. You'd have to drop the containment field and let a dart drone in, and a dart drone at that range, on a moving sovereign, at the dose it'd take. You'd need 40 seconds of clear shots, and it will not give you 40 seconds. It gave its bonded handlers no seconds. The only reason we know it's healthy is that a 19-year-old walks up to it twice a shift and it lets him. If you want it dead, you have exactly one delivery method, and his name is Arlo Vance, and I do not think he'll do it." Asuk's 4 eyes stopped cycling and fixed on her, all 4, which meant she had its full attention, which was never a comfortable place to be. "Then," the overwarden said, "we will have to give the contractor a reason." The reason arrived as paperwork, because that was how the reach hurt people. Arlo's contract came up for its 90-day review 2 weeks early, which was not a thing that happened, and the review found deficiencies, which was also not a thing that happened to a contractor who cleaned his docks well enough that nobody thought about them. The deficiencies were vague and total. conduct unbecoming, unauthorized access to restricted containment, misappropriation of station consumables. Any one of them was enough to void his berth, and voiding his berth meant a one-way passage on the next hauler to wherever it was going, which was not toward Earth and not anywhere he knew. The clerk who delivered the notice was apologetic in the way of a person handing you something they were told to hand you. "There's a remedy path," the clerk said, not meeting his eyes, and slid a second slate across. "Cooperation with an ongoing containment action. Signed off, all deficiencies vacated. Berth secured. Passage home end of your term." Arlo read the remedy path. It took him a while because it was written in the careful poison of station law, but underneath the poison it said one clear thing: help us put the animal down and you can stay. Refuse and you're gone on the next boat. He set the slate down. He did not get angry, which the clerk had been braced for and did not know what to do about. He just looked at it for a while, the way he'd looked at the wound, a problem that had gotten into his path. "Tell the overwarden thanks for the offer," Arlo said, and picked up his mop frame and went to work his shift. He did not sign it. He also did not tell anyone he wasn't going to sign it, because on his lease you did not announce your fights, you just showed up not having quit. So Asuk's office logged him as considering, and gave him 72 hours, and Arlo spent the first of those 72 hours doing what he did every shift, which was carry the trim across Dock 9 and feed the animal that the station was now paying him, in effect, to help kill. Kelly found him at the wash slots that evening and stood at her careful distance and said, "You know what they're doing to you." "I can read," Arlo said. "You should sign it." That got his attention. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something in the human's face that was not the flat, patient calm, something quick and sharp that surfaced and went under again. "Say that again." "I said you should sign it, and I mean you should take the berth and the passage and go home, because if you don't, they will find another way, and the another way will be worse for you, and it will not save the animal." Kelly crouched, which put her nearer the ground than her rank ever put her, nearer his level. "I have been on this station 11 years. Asuk does not lose. If it has decided that thing dies, and the only open question is whether you die with it or go home without it. I am telling you the mathematics. Sign it. Go home. Let me carry the water while you're gone," and her voice caught on the size of what she was offering, "and I will figure out the rest. But you cannot win this by being stubborn at a clamp." Arlo was quiet. Behind the ferroglass the animal shifted, sensing the change in his voice the way it sensed everything about his voice, and settled its great head where it could watch them both. "You'd carry the water," Arlo said. "I would try. It won't take it from you, not yet. Might in a month if you did it right, twice a shift, same rhythm, same angle, didn't loom, didn't rush, might." He nodded slowly. "But you'd try." "I would." "Then you already lost the argument you're making," Arlo said gently, and Kelly realized she had, though it took her a moment to see how. "You just told me you'd stand at a cage the whole station's afraid of and pour water through the slots for a month on the chance an animal might one day let you. That's not the mathematics. That's the opposite of the mathematics. You did the sum and you got go home, and then you offered to do the exact thing that got me here in the first place." He almost smiled. "You're closer to being from where I'm from than you think. You just haven't decided to be yet." Kelly had no answer. She had come to talk a foolish boy out of dying, and instead she'd been shown a mirror, and the thing looking back out of it was the small, stubborn part of her that had sat wrong for 9 days over an order she'd signed. She stood, because her knees had started to ache from the crouch, and because she needed the height back to feel like herself. "What will you do?" she said. "Feed her," Arlo said, tipping the last of the trim through the slot. "That's all I ever decided to do. Everything after that is just other people deciding things around it." He'd said her. Kelly filed it away with the rest. The naming happened by accident, the way the best of it did. Thren needed a designation for the file, because pending re-evaluation could not stay open forever with the subject listed as impound lot 4471, and the veterinary system demanded, in its bureaucratic thoroughness, a common name field. Thren asked Arlo, on one of the vet's now daily visits to 9, what the human called it, expecting nothing usable. "I don't call her anything," Arlo said. "She's not mine to name. The system requires a common name." Arlo thought about it. He looked at the animal, 4 meters of gray apex predator lying with its chin on its paws, watching the two of them talk, patient, waiting for him the way it now always waited for him, and he shrugged. "Call her girl then," he said. "That's all I ever say to her. Easy girl. Eat up girl, just girl." So Thren typed it, and the SABIC reaches veterinary registry, in a font designed for logging the mass and hazard class of dangerous xenofauna, recorded the designation of its class sovereign impound as girl. And because the registry fed the containment registry, and the containment registry fed the manifest system, within a day every official document on the station that referred to the most dangerous animal in 40 light years referred to it as girl. And the incongruity of it, the hazard dread warning banners, the sovereign class, lethal, do not approach headers, all sitting above the plain small word girl, made 3 separate clerks laugh out loud at their terminals, which was 3 more laughs than the impound file had generated in its entire prior existence. Doff opened a new book on it, whether the overwarden would order the designation changed. Asuk did not. Asuk had other plans. The other plans wore Wren Hollow colors, and they came in on the Tuesday hauler. Kelly saw them clear customs and felt her spine go cold, because she knew the Wren Hollow. Everyone who worked a transfer station knew the Wren Hollow, the syndicate that moved the things other syndicates wouldn't touch, the weapons, the proscribed tech and the live cargo, the beasts, the sovereigns, sold to arena holders and private menageries, and the sort of warlord who wanted a graven thing on a chain to make ambassadors sweat. There were 3 of them, 2 hired muscle of a scaled species Kelly didn't place, and at their center, a Draeltine, huge, slate-hided, gold rings run through the heavy plates of its brow, moving through the concourse with the unhurried ownership of someone collecting a debt. They went straight to the administrative deck. They were with Asuk for 40 minutes. When they came out, the Draeltine was smiling, insofar as a Draeltine's mouth did that, and Asuk was not summoning anyone, and Kelly understood that the overwarden had solved its problem the way clamps solve problems, by handing it to someone else and washing its manipulators of the outcome. The animal was not going to be spaced. The animal was going to be sold. The Wren Hollow would take the liability off Asuk's books, take the sovereign off Asuk's dock, and take it, presumably, back to whatever hold it had come out of and whatever life had put the septic wound in its leg in the first place. All Asuk had to provide was a way to get it out of the cage and into the Hollow's transport, and that, Kelly knew with a sick certainty, was still the same single problem it had always been. The only living thing the animal would let near it was Arlo Vance. The Draeltine's name was Gathrax, and Gathrax came to find Arlo on Dock 9 that same evening, flanked by its 2 scaled shadows, and it was almost pleasant about it, which was worse than if it had been cruel. "You're the little handler," Gathrax said, looking down at Arlo from a height that made even the dockhands look small. Its voice was a low, grinding pleasantness, like 2 stones being polite to each other. "I've heard about you all the way from the transfer decks, the human who tamed a sovereign. You've done me a great service, boy, and I pay my debts. There's a berth on my ship for a handler with your gift. Good pay. See the galaxy. All you do is walk her up the ramp for me. She'll go. For you, won't she? She'll follow you anywhere. Walk her up my ramp and into the hold, and your troubles with the overwarden vanish, and you come away richer than a mop will ever make you." Behind the ferroglass, girl had risen. She had come to her feet without a sound, 4 meters of her, and she stood square behind the glass with her head low and her eyes on the Draeltine, and the growl that came off her was the deepest Arlo had heard yet, a sound that ran up through the deck and set the loose fittings on the far rail ticking against their mounts. She had not growled at Kelly. She had not growled at Thren in a week. She was growling now, and Arlo watched her do it, and he watched the Draeltine's scaled shadows shift their weight, and he understood something that put the whole shape of the thing together in his head at last. "She knows you," Arlo said. Gathrex's smile did not move. "All sovereigns know the Ren Hollow. We are the last thing many of them see of freedom." The grinding pleasantness never wavered. "It's nothing personal, boy. It's stock. This one's off my own manifest, slipped a hold 3 seasons back when a hauler I'd leased came apart, and I have spent good money finding her again. She's mine by law and by lien. You've kept my property alive, and I'm grateful. Now walk my property up my ramp, take my coin, and we'll none of us have a problem." Arlo looked at the animal, at Girl, 4 meters of graven death standing between him and nothing, growling at the thing that had put a chain on her and a wound in her leg, and sold her seasons of her life into a hold. And then he looked back at Gathrax, and the quick sharp thing surfaced in his face again, and this time it did not go back under. "No," Arlo said. The dock went very quiet. Gathrax let the quiet sit. It could afford to. It had a lien and an overwarden and 2 shadows with sidearms, and across from it stood a mop and a boy. "No," it repeated, as if tasting a word in a foreign tongue. "You misunderstand your position, I think. I'm not asking you to sell me something. The animal is already mine. I'm offering to pay you for a favor I could simply order the station to compel. Consider that before you spend your no." It looked past him at the animal, and the growl deepened, and Gathrax's eye plates crinkled with something that on a friendlier face would have been fondness. "Beautiful, isn't she? Do you know what she's worth on a private lot? More than this station clears in a standard year. I don't leave that in a welded box to be watered by a janitor. I'll have her up my ramp inside 3 days, with your help or over your objection. The only choice you're actually making is whether you're a man I paid or a man I stepped on. Sleep on it." It turned and went, unhurried, its shadows falling in behind, and the concourse peeled open ahead of it the way concourses do for money and muscle, and Arlo stood at the wash slots with the empty trim bucket and watched it go. Behind him the growl wound down slow into silence. He turned. Girl had not moved. She stood square behind the glass, watching the place where the Draeltine had gone, and then her eyes came down to him, and the ridge over them softened by some fraction only he would have caught. "Yeah," Arlo said quietly, "I heard him too." The lien was real. That was the first thing Kelly checked, and the checking took her half the night in the registry archives, and at the end of it she had to sit with the ugly truth that the Ren Hollow's paperwork was clean. Gathrax had a chain of title on a sovereign lost in a documented hull loss 3 seasons prior. The impound file, thanks to Thren's own thoroughness, matched the animal to that loss on 6 independent markers. Salvage and lien law across the whole transfer network said that a recovered live asset returned to its titled owner on presentation of proof, and Gathrax had presented proof, and Asuk had accepted it. And there was no clause anywhere in any of it that cared whether the asset had a septic wound in its leg or a 19-year-old who talked to it low and even twice a shift. By law, Girl belonged to the thing that had wounded her. Kelly brought this to Thren's office at the graveyard hour, and the 2 of them looked at it together, the containment officer and the veterinary officer, both of them people who had spent careers doing the recommended thing, both of them lately, having trouble sleeping. "There's no path," Kelly said. "I've read all of it. The animal is his property. Even the humane death protocol is off the table now. You can't destroy a lien asset without the lienholder's consent, and he'll never consent. She's worth a year of station revenue on a lot. In 3 days he takes her, and the human either walks her up the ramp or watches him do it the hard way, and either way she goes back to the hold." Thren's fronds hung still, and the hard way is cargo handling, Kelly said flatly. "They'll drop the field, flood the cage with knockdown gas, enough to take a sovereign, which is enough to kill 3 of anything else. So they'll clear the dock first, and when she's down they'll rig her and crane her onto a sled and up the ramp unconscious. It's ugly and it's slow and it'll cost them a fortune in gas, and there's a fair chance the dose stops her heart. But it's legal and it's theirs to try, and the only reason they'd rather have the human do it is that the human is cheaper and safer and doesn't risk the merchandise. She rubbed her ear membranes flat. That's why the offer's real. Gathrax genuinely wants Vance to say yes. Walking her up gently is worth money to him. That's our only leverage, and it isn't much. Thren was quiet a long moment. Then the old vet did a thing Kelly had never seen a Corallan do, which was set aside a professional caution it had carried its whole life and reach, deliberately, for a worse idea. 6 markers matched her to the hull loss, Thren said slowly. I logged all 6. My file is what proved the lien. It looked up. My file could prove something else. Arlo did not sleep on it, because he had already decided, and a decision doesn't need sleeping on. What he did instead was change nothing, which was its own kind of loud. He worked his shift. He carried the trim. He fed Girl at the top of the rotation and the bottom of it, and on his break, same rhythm, same angle, same low, even nothing. He behaved in every visible particular, like a man who had not been threatened by a syndicate, and served an eviction and offered a bribe. And the crew watched him do it, and something shifted in the crew. It shifted first with Pev, the galley cook, who on the second morning did not leave the trim in the slop barrel but portioned it into a clean bucket, the good cuts, and set it by the sanitation locker where Arlo would find it, and said nothing, and looked away when Arlo looked at him. It shifted with Doff, who closed all his books on the animal, every line, every pool, and refused new action, and when a loader asked him why, Doff said only, I'm not betting against the boy anymore, and that was the end of it. It shifted, most of all, in the small collective act of a dock crew who had spent 9 days walking the long way around a dying thing and had watched a stranger walk the short way, and who now, without any of them saying it aloud, began to walk the short way too. Not to touch the animal, they weren't fools, but to pass close, to nod at it, to stop being ashamed in front of it. Kelly saw the shift and understood it for what it was. The human had not organized anything. He had not made a speech. He did not seem to have it in him to make a speech. He had simply kept doing the one plain thing in the open, where everyone could see him do it, and the plain thing had turned out to be contagious. It was the most human thing she had ever watched, and she could not have said, if you'd asked her, exactly what made it human, only that it was, and that her own people, for all their laws and protocols and careful humane recommendations, did not have it, or had had it once and mislaid it somewhere in 11 years of walking the long way around. The apex thing happened on the second night, and it was Kelly who witnessed it, and she never fully told anyone. The Reach kept a security beast. Every transfer station did, a thing called a vault hound, a low-armored quadruped the dockmaster's office used to sweep the holds for stowaways and contraband, bred aggressive, run by a handler with a control rig, feared in its own right by anyone who'd been on the wrong end of a sweep. It was, in the station's small hierarchy of dangerous animals, the apex. It answered to no one but its handler, and it deferred to nothing. That night the handler ran a routine sweep down the Dock 9 side, the vault hound out ahead on its long lead, quartering the deck, and its path took it past the cage. Kelly was up on the gantry. She watched the vault hound come around the corner of the cage at a working trot, all business, and then she watched it stop. It stopped the way water hits glass. One moment 100 kilos of armored aggression quartering a deck, the next a statue, 4 feet planted, head up, every line of it locked on the gray shape behind the ferroglass. Girl had not moved. Girl lay with her chin on her paws, watching, doing nothing at all, and the vault hound stood at the end of its lead and did not advance and did not bark, and did not do any of the 12 aggressive things it was bred and trained and rigged to do. It lowered its head. Not a lunge, a lowering, slow, the armored skull dipping until its chin nearly brushed the deck, and it held that, and then it backed up. It backed the whole length of the cage, never turning its flank, and only when it had cleared the corner did it turn and resume its sweep as though nothing had happened. And its handler, who had felt the lead go slack and then taut and then slack again, frowned at his rig and cuffed the thing forward and never knew what his animal had just done. But Kelly knew. She had watched an apex predator recognize a greater one through 8 centimeters of glass, on instinct, without a sound exchanged, and lower its head and give ground. And she thought about Gathrax's Leon and Asuk's clamp and the 3 days ticking down, and she thought, they are going to put that back in a hold. The station's own apex bowed to it, and we are going to gas it and chain it and sell it back to the thing that wounded it, because a piece of paper says we may. She went down off the gantry for the second time in her career and crossed Dock 9 in the dark, and she stopped at the wash slots where the human sat with his back against the cage's steel frame, off shift, not feeding, just sitting, keeping the animal company in the small hours the way you'd sit up with anything that had been through it. I want to help you, Kelly said. Properly, not talk you into leaving, help you. Tell me there's a way and tell me what it is. Arlo looked up at her, and this time he did smile, tired and small. There might be one, he said. Thren came by, sit down. It's a long shot, and it's mostly the vet's idea, and it needs you. The rank tab, the part I can't do. He shifted over to make room against the frame, an invitation a containment officer had no business accepting and accepted anyway, lowering herself to the deck beside a sanitation contractor in the dark under the hazard-red glow of a cage that said Sovereign Class Lethal. It comes down to what the Leon actually says, Arlo went on. It says he owns the animal off the manifest. The animal off the manifest. Thren's whole file is what tied girl to that manifest, 6 markers, he said. 6 things that matched her to the thing Gathrax lost. He looked at her. What happens to the Leon if the file's wrong? If girl isn't the animal off that manifest at all? Kelly went still. The markers matched, I read them. Thren logged them himself. Thren logged them, Arlo agreed. And Thren's the only Xenovet on this station qualified to read them, and Thren's about to file a correction. Thren filed the correction at the start of business, and it was a small masterpiece of veterinary caution turned, for once, to a purpose. It did not say the animal was a different animal. Thren was too old and too honest to sign a lie outright, and Kelly had understood, sitting in the office at the graveyard hour, that a bald lie would collapse under one competing examiner and take all 3 of them down with it. What the correction said instead was true, every word of it, and that was what made it dangerous. It said that upon re-examination, the veterinary officer wished to formally record that 4 of the 6 identifying markers used to tie impound Lot 4471 to the hull loss manifest of the vessel Sarth Kel were markers common to the broad sovereign population off Kressel, dentition spacing, plate whorl, the shape of a healed rib, and not individuating, that only 2 markers were genuinely individuating. And that of those 2, one had been logged from a wound the animal no longer bore, the wound the human had healed, which meant it could no longer be independently verified by any second examiner. The correction concluded, in the flat language of the profession, that the identification supporting the Leon rested on a single remaining unverifiable marker, and that the veterinary office could no longer, in good conscience, certify the match to the standard that a transfer of titled live property required. It was not a claim that girl was the wrong animal. It was a claim that no one could prove she was the right one, and a Leon that could not prove its asset was, under Salvagen Leon law, a Leon that could not compel. Asuk received the correction and understood exactly what had been done to it, and for the first time in Kelly's 11 years the Overwarden's voice, when it summoned Thren, came close to something with an edge on it. You are telling me, Asuk said, That your own file, which established this identification 11 days ago, is now insufficient to support it. You, the examiner. I am telling you that my file was thorough enough to record its own limitations, Thren said, with a serenity that Kelly, listening at the hatch, found almost unbearably brave. The markers are what they are. I logged 4 common and 2 individuating from the start. Anyone can read that in the original file. I merely note, belatedly, that one of the 2 individuating markers healed under treatment and cannot now be re-examined. That is a fact about the animal's leg, Overwarden. I did not put it there. The human did with a lavage canister before any of us knew there would be a lien to worry about. The Franz moved slow. You are welcome to bring a second qualified examiner to overturn my finding. There is not one within 9 jumps of this station. Until there is, the identification stands at 1 unverifiable marker, and I will not certify a compelled transfer on 1 unverifiable marker. And if you order me to, I will note in the file that I did so under order, and you may explain that to the network arbiter when the Wren Hollow's competitors file to reopen every lien this office has ever certified. There was a silence on the administrative deck of a quality Kelly had never heard there before. It was the silence of a clamp encountering, for the first time, a pipe it could not close on because the pipe had made itself the wrong shape. Gathrax did not take it well, and Gathrax did not take it stupidly, which was the dangerous combination. The Drail team came to Dock 9 within the hour, and this time the grinding pleasantness was gone, and what was under it was colder and simpler. It did not threaten Arlo. It walked past Arlo as though the human were a fixture, and it stood at the ferroglass and looked in at the animal it could no longer prove was its own, and it spoke without turning around. Clever, Gathrax said. The doctor's clever and the officer helped, and you, boy, you sat there being watered proof the whole time and never knew you were the weapon. I'll give you all 3 that. Clever. It put 1 slate-gray hand flat on the glass, and behind the glass girl rose silent and set herself square, and the growl came up. Gathrax did not move its hand. But here is what clever costs you. You've made the paperwork say no one can prove she's mine. Fine. Then no one can prove she's the station's either, or the doctor's, or yours. She's an unidentified sovereign-class hazard sitting in a welded box on a commercial dock, owned by no one your law will name. Do you know what a transfer station does with an unowned sovereign-class hazard, boy? It turned its head at last and looked down at Arlo. It destroys it, for safety. No lien to consent, no owner to object, no humane death protocol to slow it down, because a humane death protocol requires a patient, and you've all just agreed on the record that this is a hazard, not a patient. You didn't save her from me. You took her off my ledger and put her on the stations, and the stations had her scheduled to die since day 1. You've done my killing for me and made it free. It took its hand off the glass and stepped back, and the terrible thing was that it was right. And Kelly, coming across the dock at a run because she'd seen it arrive, felt the ground of the whole gambit fall away beneath her. Asuk will have to order it now, Gathrax said, mild again, walking away. Its own regulations will make it. And I'll be here, boy, on my ramp to buy the salvage rights to a documented station kill for 1/10 of what I'd have paid for a live one, because I don't need her breathing to make my money. I only wanted her breathing because it was worth more. Well, you fixed that. It paused at the corner. You should have taken the berth. They regrouped in Thren's office, the 3 of them, and for a while nobody said anything, because Gathrax had found the flaw, and the flaw was fatal, and they all knew it. He's right, Thren said at last, and its voice was old. I made her ownerless. I did not think it through to the end. An ownerless sovereign on a commercial dock is a mandatory destruction under station safety code, and Asuk will invoke it because Asuk's own liability now requires it. And I have handed the Overwarden the one order it can give that no one, not the Wren Hollow, not a network arbiter, not I, can appeal. I have been so careful my whole life, and the one time I reach for a worse idea, I reach past the good one. The Franz sank. I'm sorry, I've killed her with cleverness. It was always going to be cleverness that killed her. We are a clever people. It is the thing we do, instead of the thing the human does. Arlo had been quiet, sitting on the edge of a supply crate with his forearms on his knees, listening to the aliens explain to each other how the law had closed around the animal from a new direction. Now he looked up. "Say the last part again," he said. "Which part?" "Mandatory destruction, under the safety code. Who carries it out?" Thren blinked its slow blink. "The dockmaster's office, containment." Arlo looked at Kelly. "Your containment." "I am not destroying her," Kelly said, before she'd finished thinking it and heard the flatness in her own voice and recognized it, with a small shock as the human's flatness, the voice for a decision that doesn't need sleeping on. Whatever else. "I signed one order for that animal to die, and I have spent every day since wishing I hadn't. I will not sign a second. If Asuk wants her destroyed, it can find another officer." "It'll find another officer," Arlo said, not unkindly. "You know it will, that's not the part that matters." He stood and crossed to the desk glass and looked down at the file, at the hazard banners and the single small word girl, and Kelly watched him work through something in the plain, patient way he worked through everything, a boy standing at a problem that had gotten into his path. "The part that matters is how. You told me how. The hard way. Drop the field, flood the cage with knockdown gas enough to take a sovereign, wait for her to go down, crane her out. You said it costs a fortune in gas and there's a fair chance the dose stops her heart." He turned. "How do you deliver the gas?" "Emitters in the cage frame," Kelly said slowly. "The containment field drops, the emitters flood the enclosed volume, the field goes back up to hold the gas in until she's under. It's a sealed process, automated once it's triggered. It's designed so no one has to be near the animal." "So no one has to be near the animal," Arlo repeated. "And how do you trigger it?" "From the containment panel, officer authorization." Kelly stopped. She saw where he was going a half-second before he said it, and her ear membranes flared. "Arlo, no. If the field is down and the gas is venting, the cage is open and full of a dose meant to drop 4 meters of sovereign. Anything in that volume that isn't a sovereign dies in seconds. You cannot be in there. That is the entire reason the process exists, so that no living thing has to be in there with her." "I know," Arlo said. "That's not what I'm asking." He came back and sat down again, level with them, and there was something in his face now that was not the quick sharp thing and not the flat calm, something older than both, the look of a person on a hard lease who has done the sum and does not like it and is going to do the thing anyway. "I'm asking whether the panel can tell the difference between the field being dropped to gas her and the field being dropped to open the door. Whether, if a containment officer with the right authorization dropped that field at the right moment, for the right 30 seconds, an animal that had a reason to walk could walk out of a cage that everyone's forgotten is only welded, not locked, because welds cut, and I've spent 4 months learning where the tool crib keeps the cutter." The office went silent. "You want to steal her," Thren said. "I want to open a door," Arlo said, "for an animal that never agreed to be behind it. What she does after that is up to her, same as the water, same as all of it. I open the door and I stand where she can see me, and if she wants to walk, she walks, and if she wants to stay, she stays, and either way nobody flooded a living thing with gas to sell its corpse at a discount." He looked between them, the old vet and the containment officer, the two careful, clever people who had spent their careers walking the long way around. "I can cut the weld. I can't drop the field, that's rank, that's you." He held Kelly's eyes. "I'm not going to talk you into it. I learned that trick from you and it was a bad trick. I'm just telling you where I'll be, and when, and what I need, and you'll decide what you're from." Kelly did not answer him that night. He hadn't expected her to. He had learned from her that you did not talk a person into the thing. You set the thing down where they could see it, and you let them walk up to it in their own time, the way Girl had walked up to the water. So he set it down and he went to feed Girl, and he left the two aliens in the office with the shape of it between them. Asuk moved faster than any of them. The mandatory destruction order posted at the 4th hour, station-wide, because Asuk understood the crew had gone soft and wanted the thing done before the softness set. The order was clean and total and quoted the safety code in full. An unidentified sovereign class hazard on a commercial dock, no lien holder of record, no owner to consent, standing risk to station personnel, to be humanely neutralized by containment gas at the 10th hour of the following day, Dock 9 to be cleared and sealed from the 8th hour, all personnel barred, salvage rights to be auctioned post-neutralization. It named the officer who would trigger the emitters, not Kelui. A junior named Vosk, 2 years on the station, no history with the animal, the kind of body the office chose precisely because it had no history. And it named in an appendix the pre-registered bidder for salvage rights, and the name in the appendix was the Wren Hollow. Asuk had solved its problem. It would gas the animal on its own authority, sell the corpse to Gathrax at a discount, void its liability, and be rid of the whole affair by dinner. The clamp had reshaped itself around the new pipe. It always did. Arlo read the order on the dock wall display, standing in a small, silent crowd of the crew who had also stopped to read it, and he did not say anything. And after a while he went to the tool crib and drew a plasma cutter on the sanitation account, logged for grease-trap maintenance, and clipped it to his belt, and went to feed girl her supper as if it were any other night. He had until the 8th hour tomorrow, when they would clear the dock. That was when he would cut the weld. He did not know, yet, whether the field would drop, because that was Kelui's to decide, and Kelui had not decided. But a welded door is only welded, and welds cut, and he could at least see to it that if she wanted to walk, the only thing between her and walking was a force field a rank tab could drop with one hand, and not a bead of steel that no one could reach through 8 centimeters of gas. Kelui decided at the 7th hour of the following morning, 1 hour before the clear. She had not slept. She had sat up all night in her quarters with the thing set down in front of her the way the human had set it down, and she had done the sum 100 times, and the sum kept coming out the same, and the sum was this. If she dropped that field, she ended her career and probably her freedom, because opening a containment field on a scheduled destruction was not a paperwork error. It was a crime the network took seriously, and Asuk would see her charged for it, and she would spend a good stretch of her life in a place worse than any dock. That was the mathematics. It was clean. It said don't. And every time she reached the bottom of it, she thought about the vault hound lowering its armored head in the dark, giving ground to a thing behind glass, and she thought about a 19-year-old putting his bare hands into a sovereign's mouth to pack a wound she had written off, and she thought about 11 years of walking the long way around, and she found that the mathematics, however clean, was answering a question she had stopped wanting the answer to. She went to find Thren at the 7th hour, and Thren was already awake, already dressed, already, she saw, decided, and the two of them looked at each other and did not need to say it. "I'm too old to be charged with much," Thren said. "I'll be at the panel. My authorization's as good as yours for a field drop, and I have the better excuse. I'm the veterinary officer objecting to a destruction of what I still, in my professional judgment, consider a patient. It won't hold, but it'll read better in the arbiter's file than a containment officer with no defense at all." The fronds lifted, something almost light in them. "Let the old one take the charge, officer. You've a career left to lose. I've a file to close, and I would like, for once in a long, careful life, to close one the right way." Kelui thought about arguing. She didn't. She had learned that trick too. "Then I'll clear the crew," she said. "If we're doing this in the open, and we are, because the human's right that it can't be a theft, it has to be a thing done in daylight where the arbiter can see it, then I want witnesses on that dock who will say what they saw, and I want them safe, and I want them there because they chose to be. That's mine to arrange. That's a containment officer's job, managing who's on a dock." She almost smiled. "I'll be doing my job, right up to the second I'm not. The 8th hour came, and the dockmaster's office cleared Dock 9, and the crew did not go. That was the first thing that went wrong for Asuk, and it went wrong quietly, the way the human did everything. The clearance order sounded, and the automated barriers came down at the dock throats, and the personnel were meant to file off through the throats and leave the deck sealed and empty for the 10th hour neutralization. And instead, when the barriers came down, there were 60 of them on the wrong side of the barriers on the dock, standing. Dock hands, loaders, both off-duty containment officers who'd been on the far rail the day Arlo cleaned the wound. Pev the galley cook with his apron still on. Doff, who had closed every book. They had not organized it any more than the walking the short way had been organized. They had simply, each of them at the 8th hour, found a reason to be on Dock 9, and then found no reason to leave it. And now they stood in a loose crowd between the sealed cage and the empty ramp, where the Wren Hollows transport waited, and they did not move when the clearance order repeated, and they did not move when it repeated again. Kelly stood among them, in uniform, doing her job, which at that moment consisted of standing very still and counting witnesses. Arlo stood at the cage. He had the cutter on his belt and his hand was not on it yet. Behind the ferroglass girl was up, 4 meters of her, watching the crowd and the ramp and the small human at the glass, and she was not growling, and that was somehow louder than if she had been. She stood square and silent and enormous, chin low, eyes moving, an apex predator reading a room, and the room read her back, and nobody who looked at her mistook her stillness for calm anymore. They had all learned over 11 days what the human had known from the first bucket of water. Her stillness was not the absence of the thing she was. Her stillness was the thing she was at rest deciding. The 10th hour was 2 hours off. Asuk did not wait for it. The overwarden came onto the dock flanked by 6 of its own enforcers in hardshell, and Gathrax came down off the ramp to meet it, and the 2 of them stood together at the edge of the crowd like weather about to break. Asuk surveyed the dock, the 60 bodies where there should have been none, the human at the cage, the containment officer in uniform standing among the crew instead of clearing it, and its 4 eyes cycled once slowly, taking the measure of a thing that had not been scheduled to happen. This dock is under a clearance order, Asuk said. It did not raise its voice. It never raised its voice. Every soul on it is in violation of station safety code. Officer Kelly, you will clear these personnel and seal the deck for neutralization. That is a direct instruction. I'm assessing a containment risk, Overwarden, Kelly said, and her voice was steady, and Arlo, at the cage, heard the human flatness in it and knew she'd crossed over sometime in the night. 60 untrained personnel on a dock where you propose to vent a gas rated to drop a sovereign. A gas lethal to every one of them in seconds if the field hold fails. And field holds fail, sir. The code says so itself. That's why the clear exists. I can't in good conscience certify the deck safe for neutralization while they're on it, and I can't remove them without force, and force on a crowded dock is its own hazard. My professional assessment is that the neutralization cannot proceed safely at this time. She let that sit. You're welcome to log that I said so. It was, Arlo thought, a beautiful piece of work. She'd taken Asuk's own weapon, the safety code, and turned its edge around exactly the way Thren had turned the file. You could not gas a dock full of people. The code that let Asuk kill the animal was the same code that now said it couldn't, not while 60 bodies chose to stand where the gas would go. Asuk understood it too. Its eyes stopped cycling. Then the personnel will be removed, it said, by my enforcers one at a time and charged and the deck cleared by force, and the neutralization will proceed at the 10th hour as ordered. You have bought these people an afternoon in a holding cell and the animal 2 hours. Congratulations. It gestured, and the 6 hardshells started forward into the crowd. And Gathrax, who had been watching all of this with the patience of a creditor, decided that 2 hours was 2 hours too many, and made the mistake that its whole hard career had been building toward. "No need to wait for the gas," the Dreltine said, and stepped forward, and its two scaled shadows moved with it, and they moved not toward the crowd but toward the cage, toward the human at the cage. And one of them had a rig in its hands, a rig of the kind you throw over a downed animal to crane it, and the other had a hand on the sidearm at its hip, and Gathrax's voice was the grinding pleasantness again, the worst version of it. "The boy cuts that weld sooner or later, everyone here knows it, that's why he's wearing a cutter to a clearance. So he'll cut it now, for me, with my associate's hand on him, and my rig will be over her the moment that field so much as flickers, and I'll crane her out downed or awake, and the salvage auction can go hang. Move, boy." A scaled hand closed on Arlo's shoulder from behind hard and spun him toward the weld. "Cut." Several things happened in a very small amount of time, and afterward the 60 witnesses on Dock 9 would not entirely agree on their order, though they agreed on all the parts. They agreed that Arlo did not cut. They agreed that the human went still under the scaled hand on his shoulder, went still the way Thren had once described a sovereign going still, and that he said one thing quietly, not to Gathrax and not to the shadow gripping him but to the animal behind the glass, and the thing he said was, "Girl, field's still up. You're all right. Leave it." They agreed that he told her to leave it. That he stood with a stranger's hand crushing his shoulder and a rig meant for her chest in the second stranger's hands, and that what he said to the 4 meters of graven death behind the glass was leave it. The thing you say to a dog you trust, the last thing you say before you'd say anything else, a word that told her he had it handled and she did not need to. And they agreed that girl did not leave it. Nobody agreed on the field. Kelly would say to her dying day that she never touched the panel, that Thren never touched it either, that the field drop that came in that instant came from no authorization she could name, and the panel log when the arbiter pulled it would show the field had dropped on a fault code, an emitter frame fault, the kind of fault a plasma cutter clipped to a belt and switched on against a welded steel frame might conceivably induce, though Arlo's cutter was never switched on and the arbiter could never prove it was. What everyone agreed on was that the field dropped for 1 second less, and that in that fraction of a second the difference between a welded cage and an open one stopped mattering, because a sovereign at rest deciding is a sovereign, and 8 centimeters of ferroglass had only ever been holding a thing that had not, until that moment, been given a reason to stop being held. Here the witnesses' accounts go quiet, the way accounts do. They saw the gray shape move. They did not see, afterward when they tried to reconstruct it, any of the parts they expected to see, no lunge across the frame, no snap, none of the operatic violence the word sovereign had lived in their nightmares for. It was faster than that and it was quieter than that, and it was, several of them said, using the same word without having compared notes, tidy. One moment the 2 scaled shadows stood over the human with a rig and a drawn sidearm. Then there was a sound brief, that Kelly felt in the deck plating and not in her ears, and a displacement of air, and the human was still standing exactly where he had been, untouched, with his eyes on the animal and his hands at his sides, and the 2 shadows were not where they had been, and the rig was on the deck, and the sidearm was on the deck beside it, and the matter of the 2 shadows was, in the phrase Doff used ever after and would never explain, resolved. Nobody saw it happen. That was the part they all kept coming back to. 60 witnesses on a lit dock in the middle of a working shift, all of them looking right at it, and not one of them could tell the arbiter what they had seen, because there had been nothing to see, only a before and an after and the tidy, quiet space between them, where a sovereign had attended to a threat to the one thing on the station it had decided to keep. Gathrax was still standing. Gathrax had not moved, had not had time to move, and now Gathrax stood alone at the edge of a spreading circle of empty deck with its 2 shadows gone and its rig on the ground, and it looked at the animal, and the animal looked back at it, and the animal was not behind glass anymore. Girl stood over the human, 4 meters of her, 1 4-foot planted on either side of him so that Arlo stood in the shelter of her chest like a child under a table. And she was not growling, and she was not still, either, not the resting stillness. She had lowered her head to the Draeltein's level, all the way down, and she held it there, and every plate of her was turned toward Gathrax with an attention so total that the crowd 20 meters back felt the edge of it and stepped away as one body. She was waiting. She was plainly waiting to see what Gathrax would do, and she had all the time there was. "Girl," Arlo said from under her, quiet. One hand came up and rested light on the gray foreleg beside his head, the way he'd rested it on the glass 100 times. "Easy, leave it." "He's leaving." He looked at Gathrax when he said the last part, and it was not a threat because Arlo did not make threats. It was simply a description of the only future in the room that did not end the way the two shadows had ended, offered to the Draeltein plainly, the way you'd offer water through a slot. "Do what you want. It's there." Gathrax took it. The Draeltein backed up. It backed the way the Vault Hound had backed, never turning its flank, one heavy step at a time, up the ramp of its own transport, and it did not say anything clever on the way, because the clever had gone out of it entirely. And at the top of the ramp it stopped and looked one last time at the animal it had wounded and chained and sold and come across 9 jumps to reclaim, standing free on a commercial dock with a 19-year-old sheltered under its chest. And whatever a Draeltein felt in a moment like that did not show on a face built of slate. Then it went inside, and the ramp came up, and the Wren Hollow's transport uncoupled from the reach within the hour and did not file a complaint with the Arbiter, because there was no version of the complaint that did not begin with the Draeltein explaining what its associates had been doing with a rig and a drawn weapon on a lit dock, and end with 60 witnesses who had all discovered, in the same instant, exactly which side of this they had been standing on the whole time. For a long moment after the ramp came up, nobody on Dock 9 moved at all. Girl stood over the human, in the middle of a wide, clean circle of deck that everyone else had, without deciding to, vacated. She had lifted her head from the low, waiting posture and she stood easy again, and the easy was worse than the waiting, because the waiting had been aimed and the easy was aimed at nothing, which meant it could be aimed at anything, and every soul on the dock understood now, all the way down, what that meant. She was not in a cage. There was no glass. There was a Sovereign-class Apex Predator loose on a commercial dock of the Sabik Reach, standing over a sanitation contractor, and the only thing in the room that governed it was a 19-year-old with one hand resting on its foreleg. Asuk stood at the edge of the circle with its 6 enforcers, and the enforcers had their weapons half raised, and they were looking to the Overwarden for the order, and the Overwarden was not giving it. Kelui watched Asuk's 4 eyes cycle and understood the arithmetic running behind them, because it was the same arithmetic she'd done all night, only from the other side. 6 hardshells, 1 sovereign, on an open dock, with 60 witnesses and a network arbiter's inquiry now certain. And the sovereign had just, in front of all of them, resolved 2 armed professionals so fast and so completely that no one could say they'd seen it, which meant 6 hardshells raising weapons was not a plan. It was a body count, and the first body in it would be whichever enforcer the animal reached first, and it would reach first faster than the order to fire could finish leaving Asuk's mouth. And the human was standing under its chest. You could not fire on the animal without firing through the human, and firing through the human would put every one of the 60 witnesses, and the arbiter's whole inquiry, on exactly one side. "Officer Kelui," Asuk said. Its voice had changed. It was still level, it would always be level, but the certainty had gone out from under the level, the way the deck goes out from under you. "Your professional assessment of the containment situation." Kelui stepped forward, into the edge of the circle alone, and she was aware of every eye on the dock on her, and she was aware that whatever she said in the next breath would be the thing the station did, because Asuk had just, for the first time in 11 years, handed her the decision, not because it respected her, but because it did not want the decision, because there was no version of the decision a clamp could make without being crushed by it. And Asuk had survived 11 years by knowing precisely which decisions to hand away. My assessment, Kelly said, and she pitched it to Carrie because 60 witnesses and an arbiter's file were listening, is that the animal is not a containment risk. It is a managed animal. It has a handler. It has demonstrated in front of this entire dock that it discriminates precisely between a threat and a non-threat, that it acts only on threat, and that it takes direction from its handler in the presence of threat. It stood down, over Warden on his word, with a target in front of it. That is not a hazard. That is the single most disciplined working animal on this station, and I have watched the Vault Hound give ground to it, and I will put all of that in the arbiter's file under my name and my rank. She turned slowly to take in the enforcers with their half-raised weapons. What is a containment risk in my professional assessment is 6 armed personnel pointing weapons at a managed animal across a crowded dock. I'd have them lower those now, before somebody makes this animal's assessment for it. Asuk was quiet for the length of 3 of Girl's enormous breaths. Then it gestured, and the 6 weapons came down. The arbiter came in on the next long haul, a thin ascetic creature of a species that did nothing but adjudicate, and it spent 4 days on the Sabak Reach, and it interviewed all 60 witnesses, and Asuk, and Thren, and Kelly, and Arlo, and it pulled every log the station had, and at the end of the 4 days it issued a finding that satisfied no one entirely and was, everyone privately agreed, the only finding the facts allowed. It found that the Wren Hollow's lien could not be sustained on a single unverifiable marker, and struck it. It found that the mandatory destruction order had been lawfully issued and lawfully obstructed, and declined to charge the obstruction, on the grounds that the obstruction had consisted entirely of personnel choosing to stand on a public dock, which was not a crime the code contemplated, an omission the arbiter recommended the code correct, and the code never did. It found the field drop to be an emitter frame fault of undetermined cause and assigned no culpability, and Kelly breathed again, and Thren looked almost disappointed to have kept its career. It found the disappearance of 2 Wren Hollow personnel to be unexplained by any evidence before it, 60 witnesses, no testimony, no remains within the station's recovery systems that could be matched, an animal that no instrument had recorded in the act, and, having no evidence, made no finding, and closed that portion of the inquiry with the single dry line that the persons in question appeared to have departed the station and were free to file a complaint should they wish to, which they did not. And on the central question, what now was the animal, the arbiter did the thing that clamps and codes and careful clever people do when a fact will not fit any of their boxes, which was to invent a new box. It ruled that the animal-designated girl was neither an impound, nor a hazard, nor an unowned asset, but a registered working companion animal under the guardianship of the individual whose management rendered it non-hazardous, and that this guardianship was to be recorded in the station registry, and that the individual so recorded bore full responsibility for the animal's conduct and full authority over its disposition, and that no party might compel its transfer, destruction, or handling over that individual's objection. It was, the arbiter noted, an unprecedented classification for a sovereign-class predator. It was also, the arbiter noted, the only classification consistent with the observed facts, the chief observed fact being that the animal was demonstrably not hazardous to anyone except those who threatened its guardian, and that this was, whatever the literature said, a description of a companion animal and not a description of a hazard. The registry required a name for the individual recorded as guardian, and Arlo gave it, and the clerk typed it, and the Sabak Reach's official record was amended so that above the hazard red banners and the sovereign class header and the plain small word girl, there now sat a second field guardian, and in it the name of a 19-year-old sanitation contractor, and the incongruity of that. of a mop-tier contract laborer holding registered guardianship over the most dangerous animal in 40 light years, made not 3 clerks but the whole registry office laugh. And this time the laugh had something else in it besides disbelief, something closer to the feeling you get when a thing that has been wrong for a long time is quietly, unexpectedly, set right. The birth deficiencies vanished from Arlo's file. Nobody sent a notice. They were simply gone the next time anyone looked, the way things went at the level Asuk operated. He was not promoted, because you did not promote a contractor, but his contract was extended, and his rotation was quietly rebuilt so that it covered docks 7 through 12 on a schedule that happened to keep him always within reach of dock 9. And no one wrote down why, because the Y was 4 meters tall and lay in the sun of the dock's daylight panels, and did not do well when the human was gone longer than a shift. Because that was the thing that surprised the station most, in the end. Not the 2 shadows on the lit dock. That was over so fast it lived in people's memory as a rumor even to those who'd witnessed it. What surprised them, what they could not get used to, was the after. The sovereign was free now, uncaged, uncollared, under nothing but the word of a boy, and what the freed sovereign chose to do with its freedom was follow the boy around while he cleaned the docks. She followed him at a distance of about 3 meters, which she seemed to have chosen herself and never varied, close enough to close it in a heartbeat and far enough not to crowd. When he ran the sonic mop down a dock, she paced him, and when he stopped to empty a grease trap, she lay down and put her chin on her paws and watched him work with the patient, half-lidded attention of a thing that has decided its whole job is to know where one particular small creature is at all times. When he sat to eat, she lay beside him, 4 meters of graven apex predator curled in the daylight with her spine against his back, and he ate his ration and shared none of it because she'd already eaten and he wasn't sentimental about that. And the dock hands who passed, walking the short way now, always the short way, got used to the sight the way you get used to any impossible thing, which is to say never entirely, but enough to stop dropping what they were carrying. The codification started with the water, because of course it did. Arlo still watered her the same way, twice a shift, though there was no cage now and no wash slots, just a 40-liter reclaim drum he filled at the potable tap and set down where she liked it, at the corner of Dock 9 where the daylight came through the dome brightest. He did it at the top of the rotation and the bottom, same rhythm, same angle, and he said the same thing he'd said the first day and every day since. "There you go, girl." And one of the loaders, a young Bren who'd been on the far rail the day of the wound, took to timing his own brakes so he could be on 9 when the human watered the sovereign, because there was something in it he could not name and did not want to miss. The young Bren was not the only one. Within a month the watering had an audience, a rotating handful of crew who found reasons to be near it, and the audience developed, the way audiences do, a sense of occasion, and the sense of occasion developed, the way it does among a martial people, into something with a shape and a name. They called it, in the half-joking, half-not way the crew named things, the setting of the drum, and they were quiet for it, and a loader who talked through it got told to hush, and none of them could have told you why a janitor putting water down for an animal had become a thing you were quiet for, only that it had, and that the being quiet for it felt like the correction of some old debt none of them had known they carried. Thren wrote it up. The old vet had discovered, late in a careful life, a taste for writing up the things that mattered instead of only the things that closed, and it produced a monograph, an actual monograph, submitted to the veterinary network, that would be read by xenovets across 9 jumps and change in small ways, how a dozen species thought about the animals they had written off. It was titled in the flat font of the profession, Directed Affiliative Bonding in a Class Sovereign Predator Absent Conditioning Protocol, a case study, and its central finding, stripped of the caution Thren wrapped around everything, was this: that the entire literature on sovereign predators, the shock rigs, the bonding protocols, the spotters with rifles, the 4 dead handlers, had been the literature of a people who approached the animal as a thing to be dominated, and that a single subject, approached instead as a thing to be helped, had produced a bond the literature said was impossible in 11 days over a bucket of water by a mortal creature with no training and no rank and no weapon at all. The monograph did not use the word compassion. The veterinary network had no term for it. Thren left a space where the term should go, and noted in a footnote that several readers would say haunted them, that the deficiency was in the vocabulary and not in the finding. Kelly read the monograph 3 times. She was the one in the end who gave Thren the word, because she had spent 11 years on transfer stations and had once, long ago, taken a linguistics elective, and she remembered that the death-world species, the humans, whom the network filed under high attrition origin and mostly left alone, had a cluster of words the network's own languages rendered badly, and one of them was the word the human had used that first day when Kelly had asked him why. "Where I'm from, we don't." She wrote it in the margin of Thren's monograph and passed it back, and Thren read it, and the two of them sat with it in the veterinary office, 2 careful, clever people from a clever, careful species, and understood that they had been handed, along with an impossible animal, a fact about themselves they would now have to carry, which was that their people had a word for dominating a beast and a word for studying a beast and a word for humanely killing a beast, and no word at all that anyone could find for simply refusing to walk past one. Asuk never spoke to Arlo directly. That was not a snub. It was simply that Asuk did not speak to contractors, and a sovereign's guardianship did not, in the overwarden's private accounting, change what a contractor was. But Asuk changed, in the small deniable ways a clamp changes, which is to say its behavior changed while it maintained it had not. The dock wall displays on 9, which had shown sovereign class, lethal, do not approach for 11 days, quietly reformatted one shift to read restricted handler present, and then, a week later, to read nothing at all. The hazard banner simply retired, and no one could find the work order that had retired it. The Wren Hollow's berthing privileges on the Sabic Reach were revoked on a technicality that appeared in the docking regs one morning and had, the reg claimed, always been there. And on the standing agenda of the station's monthly safety review, between the airlock seal audit and the fire suppression check, there appeared a new recurring line item, which read, in the code's own flat language, companion animal, sovereign, welfare and provisioning, and which required the dockmaster's office to certify, each month, that the animal-designated girl had adequate access to water, protein, and its guardian. The first time in the history of the Sabic Reach that the safety code had been amended to require the station to look after something rather than to look out for it, and everyone knew Asuk had written it, and Asuk denied writing it, and the line item stayed on the agenda for as long as the station stood. There was exactly one soul on the station who had not gotten the message, and he got it in due course. He was a transit inspector, a Vol, in from a regional oversight office on one of the passenger boats, brisk and self-important and armored in the confidence of a man, whose credentials had never once failed to make a room defer to him. He came onto Dock 9 on his rounds and found a sanitation contractor watering a loose sovereign in violation of, by his count, 11 separate codes, and he did what men like him do, which was plant himself in the middle of the setting of the drum and demand loudly, to know who had authorized this animal to be uncaged, and why it was not restrained, and did anyone here understand the liability, and he pointed, actually pointed, a stiff accusing digit at 4 meters of graven apex predator, and took a step toward it to make his point, and put himself, in his righteous certainty, between the human and the animal's water. The dock went quiet in the particular way it now went quiet, and the young Bren loader shut his eyes. Girl lifted her head, she did not growl. She turned slow and looked at the inspector, just looked, soft-eyed, unhurried, the whole vast weight of her attention settling on him the way a hand settles on a table, and she yawned. It was an enormous yawn, a slow unfolding of a mouth that could take a drailteen off at the shoulder, teeth the length of a man's forearm catching the dome light. And then it closed, and she laid her chin back on her paws and went on watching him with the flat, bored patience of a thing that had assessed a threat, found none, and could not be troubled to pretend otherwise. The inspector's stiff digit came down. The color went out of his face by degrees, the way it does when a man's body understands a thing several seconds before his pride will let his mind admit it, and he stepped back, carefully, out from between the human and the drum, and he found that his urgent questions about liability had entirely left him. "Water's getting cold," Arlo said mild, not looking up. "You're in her light." The inspector left. He filed nothing. His report, when it eventually surfaced, noted the animal as adequately managed and recommended no action, and moved on quickly to the state of the grease traps, which he rated satisfactory, and which were, that season, the cleanest on the transfer network, a small fact that pleased Arlo more than any of it, because it was the only part of his job the Galaxy had actually hired him to do, and he had never once let the Sovereign make him late for it. The Vault Hound was retired. Its handler asked for the retirement and could not fully explain the request, only that the animal would no longer sweep the Dock 9 side, would plant its feet at the corner and lower its head and refuse, and that a security beast that lowered its head to something was a security beast that had, in its own understanding, been reassigned to a rank it did not hold. So they retired it, and this was the part the handler told at the bar late and swore was true. They rehomed it on Dock 9, where it took to lying about 8 meters from Girl, never closer, in the posture of a junior officer who has found a commander worth standing near, and where Girl tolerated it with the vast indifference of the genuinely senior, and where the two of them, the station's old apex and its new one, kept a kind of company that no xenoethologist could classify and threaten. In a second footnote, declined to try. The coalition came for her in the spring, which on a station meant only that the traffic changed, the long-haul grain runs giving way to the passenger boats, and on one of the passenger boats rode a delegation from the Coalition Defense Directorate, and they had read Thren's monograph, and they had come to the Sabak Reach with a proposal and a requisition order, and the settled confidence of people who had never in their institutional lives been told no by a contractor. The officer in charge was a well-named Subdirector Ashanu, sleek and courteous and armored in the particular politeness of the very powerful, and she did not go to Arlo first, because that was not how the Directorate did things. She went to Asok, and she went to Thren, and she assembled the station's authorities in the administrative deck's good conference room, and she laid out the proposal, and the proposal was, underneath its courtesy, very simple. The coalition was at war. In the slow, grinding way, the coalition was always at war, on 3 fronts nobody at the Sabak Reach would ever see, and the coalition had spent a fortune and a generation trying to field sovereign predators as weapons and had gotten, for its fortune and its generation, 4 dead handlers per animal and a program that ate money and produced nothing. And now here on a nowhere transfer station, a monograph documented what the whole program had failed to buy. A sovereign, bonded, biddable, controllable, managed by a single handler with no rig and no rifle. The Directorate did not want the animal. The Directorate was too sophisticated to want the animal. The Directorate wanted the method. It wanted Arlo Vance in a training facility on a core world, teaching the Directorate's handlers to do what he had done, so that the coalition could field not 1 bonded sovereign but 100, 1,000, and win its slow grinding wars on its 3 unseen fronts. And to that end the Directorate had brought a requisition order, lawful under the wartime statutes, compelling the specialized services of any qualified individual, and Arlo Vance, guardian of the only bonded sovereign in coalition space, was, whether he liked the word or not, qualified. "He'll be well compensated," Subdirector Ashanu said. "Honored, even. Rank if he wants it. We can commission a Deathworlder, there's precedent. His animal comes with him, naturally. We'd never separate them. We've read the doctor's work. We understand the bond is the asset. This is not a hardship posting over warden. This is the making of the boy. He teaches us his method, we field it, and a great many of my people stopped dying on those 3 fronts. I've brought the order as a formality. I'd much rather he came gladly, but I've brought the order. Asuk, who had spent months not speaking to a contractor, found that it had, somewhat to its own surprise, a thing to say. You've read the doctor's monograph, the overwarden said slowly, but I don't think you've understood it. Ask the doctor. They asked Thren. And Thren, old and careful and no longer in the least careful about the things that mattered, told the subdirector the one thing the directorate, in all its sophistication, had failed to grasp. There is no method, Thren said. That is the finding. That is the entire finding, and I wrote it as plainly as the profession allows, and I see you have read past it the way clever people read past the thing they don't want to be true. You imagine the human did a technique, a sequence, a protocol, something a facility could teach and a handler could learn. He did not. I have watched him with her every day for a season. There is no sequence. He carried water to a dying animal because he could not walk past a dying animal, and he kept carrying it after it would have been safer to stop, and he put his hands in its mouth because the wound needed cleaning and he was the one who was there, and none of it, subdirector, was in service of an outcome. That is the method. The method is that there was no method. He was not trying to bond a sovereign. He was trying to help an animal, and the bond was what helping an animal turns out to produce in a creature that helps animals. The fronds lifted. You cannot field that. You can commission the boy and rank him and ship him to your facility and stand your handlers in a row in front of a dying sovereign, and every one of your handlers will approach that animal wanting the bond, wanting the weapon, wanting the outcome. And the animal will know, because the animals always know, that it is a means to someone and not an end to anyone, and it will kill your handlers exactly as it has always killed your handlers, and you will have learned nothing. Because the one thing you needed to learn is a thing your whole institution is built to be incapable of. Thren paused. You want to weaponize mercy, subdirector. It doesn't work. That's what mercy is. It's the thing that stops working the moment you want it to do something. There was a silence in the good conference room. Nevertheless, Subdirector Ashanu said, because she was a professional and the requisition order was in her hand, I have the order. They served it on Arlo on Dock 9, which was a mistake, though a courteous one. He was watering her when they came, the setting of the drum, with its small quiet audience, the young Bren Loader and Pev on his break and half a dozen others. And Subdirector Ashanu crossed the dock with 2 aides and her sleek politeness and her lawful order, and she found the human crouched by a 40-liter drum with a sovereign's great head lowered to drink beside him, and she waited, courteously, for the animal to finish. And then she introduced herself and explained the honor being done him, and set the order down on the deck within his reach, the way you'd set down anything you expected to be picked up. Arlo read it. It took him a while. Girl had lifted her head from the drum and stood easy behind him, water running off her jaw, watching the sleek official the way she watched everything new, without heat, assessing, and the small audience had gone very still, because they had seen a Ren Hollow Drailteen stand roughly where the subdirector was standing, and they remembered how that ended, and the subdirector had not read that part of the file, or had read it and filed it under rumor, because the arbiter had made no finding. It says I have to come teach your people how to do this, Arlo said when he'd finished. He set the order back down on the deck, so they can make more of her for the war. So they can save lives, Subdirector Ashanu said. A great many, on fronts you'll never. How's the animal you'd start with, Arlo said. The subdirector paused. I'm sorry. You said you'd stand your handlers in front of a dying sovereign, so you'd have a dying sovereign. Where's it dying? In a cage in a facility on a schedule so your handlers can practice on it. He wasn't angry. That was the thing the subdirector would report afterward. unable to explain it, that the human was not angry, had never once been angry, that he asked the question the way you'd ask directions. You want to teach 100 handlers to do what I did, and the first thing you need to teach them is 100 dying animals to do it too. That's your training program. That's the facility. He looked at her. You don't want to learn how to help a dying animal, subdirector. You want to learn how to look like you're helping one, well enough to fool the animal so you can use it. And the doctor already told you why that won't work, and I can't tell you anything the doctor didn't except this. He stood up, and Girl's head came up level with his, 3 meters back, easy, and the audience held its breath. She's not a weapon. She was never a weapon. She's an animal somebody left to die and I didn't walk past. That's all. You can put me on your boat and ship me to your facility and rank me and honor me, and I'll sit in your training room and I will not be able to teach your handlers the one thing, because the one thing isn't a thing you do. It's a thing you are, or you're not. And your whole institution, like the doctor said, is built out of people who aren't. That's not an insult. It's just where you're from. Subdirector Ashanu looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked at the animal, easy and enormous and watching, water on its jaw, and something moved behind the Vel's sleek courtesy that might have been the first real doubt she'd felt about the order in her hand since the day it was cut. The order is lawful, she said, but she said it more quietly. Sure, Arlo said. Lots of things are. He crouched back down and picked up the drum to refill it because the shift went on whether or not a war wanted him. You can enforce it. You've got aids and a boat and a statute. But here's the part your order doesn't cover, and you should think about it before you enforce anything. He nodded once back over his shoulder at 4 meters of graven sovereign standing loose on an open dock. I go where I want, on account of nobody sensible tries to stop me anymore. And she goes where I go. Nobody makes her, she just does. So the question you're actually deciding, subdirector, isn't whether you can compel a contractor. It's whether you want to put the nod again, on a coalition boat in a coalition facility, surrounded by exactly the kind of people who spend their day wanting things from it, against its will, because a piece of paper said you might. He looked up at her, mild and patient and entirely without threat. I wouldn't. Not because of what she'd do, because of what it'd cost you to find out and how little you'd have to show for it after. You'd have a dead facility and a story nobody believes and a boy who still can't teach you the thing, same as the Draeltine. He had a lawful lien too. Subdirector Ashanu withdrew the order the next morning. She did it with the same courtesy she did everything, and she did not admit that the human had changed her mind, only that the operational calculus does not favor enforcement at this time, which was the sort of thing the directorate said when it had looked into a thing and been quietly frightened by the shape of it. She left on the next passenger boat. But before she left, she went back to Dock 9, alone this time, without aids or order, and she stood at a careful distance and watched the setting of the drum, the human and the sovereign and the small quiet audience. And Kelly, who was there, watched the subdirector watch it, and saw the sleek official's face do the thing every face did the first time it really saw the thing, the small involuntary loosening, the letting go of some certainty that had been held so long it had stopped feeling like a grip. We spent 40 years and a great deal of blood, the subdirector said to Kelly, quietly, not turning, trying to make an animal like that do what we wanted, and a janitor did it in 11 days by wanting nothing from it at all. She was silent a moment. Do you know what frightens me, officer? It isn't the animal. I've stood in front of worse. It's that the boy is right and the doctor is right and there is no method, and so there is nothing my institution can do with this. We are very good at making people do things. We are very good at making things do things. We have no procedure whatsoever for simply being the kind of people this happens to. And I begin to suspect that is the one capability that would have won the war, and it is the one capability we cannot requisition, and it has been sitting on a mop-tier contract on a nowhere station the whole time, and we walked past it, the way we walk past everything we can't use. She turned, finally, and there was something almost rueful in the sleek face. "Tell the doctor its monograph will be read at the directorate. Tell it no one there will understand it. And tell the boy," she paused, and seemed to decide the boy did not need telling anything, that the boy had said all there was to say and would only be embarrassed by more of it. "Never mind. Good shift, officer." She left. The requisition was never reissued, and that, everyone assumed, was the end of it. It was not the end of it, because 6 weeks later another hauler came in with something dying in its hold, and this time the whole station was watching to see what it would do. The something was not a sovereign. It was a smaller thing, a beast off a different world, a herd guardian species that the crew of the hauler had bought cheap as cargo and hauled badly, and it came off the ship half-starved and racked with a lung rot from the hold's foul air, and it was mean with pain and pain-stupid, and it had bitten 2 of the hauler's crew on the way in, and so it arrived on the Sabik Reach exactly as Girl had arrived a season before. Feared, dying, and alone, staked out on a dock with a wide circle of nobody around it, and a schedule ticking toward an airlock. And the Sabik Reach, which a season before would have signed the humane death order and walked the long way around for 11 days, did not. Kelly saw it happen, and she never forgot it, because it happened without anyone leading it, the way the good things had all happened since the human came. A loader noticed the new beast first, the young Bren, the one who timed his brakes for the setting of the drum, and he did not walk past it. He stopped, the way he'd watched the human stop, and he stood at the edge of the circle and looked at the dying thing, and then he went and got a drum of water, potable line, not gray, and he set it down inside the circle where the yellow paint said not to, and he sat down at an angle where he wasn't looming, and he waited. He had learned it entirely by watching. He did not do it perfectly. But he did it, and because he did it, another loader did it, and then Pev came with trim from the galley without being asked, and by the end of the shift there was a small quiet audience around the new beast too, and a rotation forming, and a drum being filled, and the veterinary office, Thren, moving faster than it had moved in years, was flushing a lung rot instead of writing a humane death recommendation, because the station had a precedent now, and the precedent was that you did not walk past. Arlo watched the whole of it from 30 meters off, leaning on his mop frame with Girl lying easy at his side, and he did not go over, and Kelly, coming to stand beside him, understood why. "You could help," she said. "They've got it," Arlo said. He nodded at the young Bren, crouched at his angle by the drum, doing it wrong in all the small ways and right in the one way that mattered. "Kid doesn't need me over there making him nervous. He needs to find out he can do it himself. That's the whole thing." He was quiet a moment, and then he said, in the plain way he said everything, the closest he ever came to telling her what any of it had meant to him. "Where I'm from, when a kid's first learning to handle stock, you don't do it for him. You stand back far enough that he thinks it's his, and close enough that if it goes wrong you're already moving. That's all I'm doing." He shifted the mop frame. "That's all I ever did over there either. Stood close enough. She did the rest." The new beast lived. It never became what Girl became. It was a smaller, simpler animal, and it bonded to the young Bren in the ordinary way a rescued creature bonds to the one who fed it. Nothing graven about it. Nothing that would ever make a directorate cross 9 jumps. But it lived, and it stayed, and it lay in the sun of the daylight panels on Dock 8 where the young Bren worked, and the Sabik Reach, which had once been a place that moved cargo and walked the long way around dying things, became, without anyone declaring it, without a single line of code requiring it, a place where dying things were not walked past. That was the human's real work, Kelly came to understand, and it was not the sovereign at all. The sovereign was the thing everyone remembered, the impossible headline, the story you told at the bar. But the sovereign was just the once. The thing the human had actually done, the thing that would outlast him, that would still be going long after his contract ended and the docks forgot his name, was smaller than the sovereign and larger than it at the same time. He had shown a station full of people who walked past that you could stop. And they had found out, to their lasting unease and their lasting improvement, that once you had seen someone stop, you could no longer entirely go back to walking. The accident on Dock 11 happened at the bottom of a graveyard shift, and it was the kind of thing that killed people on transfer stations every cycle without anyone off the docks ever hearing about it. A stack of freight modules on an autoloader lost its restraint field. A bad relay later was the finding, the sort of 2-credit part the reach ran past its service life, the way it ran everything past its service life. And the top 3 modules came down. Each module was 4 tons empty, and these were not empty, and they came down across the loader lane where a maintenance crew was pulling a coolant line. And when the noise stopped and the dust cleared, there was a mountain of shifted cargo where the lane had been, and under the near edge of it, pinned from the waist down, one of the maintenance crew. A young apprentice, a Corlin not 2 years grown, one of Thren's own kin as it happened, named Sella, alive and screaming and going to be neither for very long, because the coolant line she'd been pulling had sheared in the collapse and Dock 11 was filling fast, with a vapor that froze a lung solid in about 4 minutes, and there was no reaching her through the cargo before then, and no lifting 4 tons off her with anything the graveyard shift had to hand. Arlo was 2 docks over. He heard the collapse and the alarm, and he was moving before the second one finished, and Girl was moving with him, and Kellui, who tells this part, because Kellui was the duty officer that shift and got there 30 seconds behind the human and saw the rest of it herself. Kellui came onto Dock 11 to find the maintenance crew back at the throat, driven off by the vapor, and the apprentice pinned and screaming in the white fog of it, and the human standing at the edge of the fog doing the thing he always did, which was assess. Lines sheared, a maintenance hand was shouting over and over uselessly. Lines sheared, she's in the cloud, you can't. How much off her? Arlo said, not shouting. The maintenance hand stopped shouting because someone was asking a question that had an answer. What? The module on her. How much do I have to lift to pull her clear? Give me a number. You can't lift any of it, it's 4. I'm not going to lift it, Arlo said. He was crouched now at the edge of the fog, looking at the geometry of the fall the way he'd looked at the wound, at the way the near module had come to rest on the sheared stub of a stanchion so that it bore on the apprentice at an angle, 1 corner down. I needed to move about that much. He held his hands a hand's width apart. Tip, not lift. That corner comes up a hand's width. She comes out from under if somebody pulls her the second it does. That's 2 jobs. Moving 4 tons a hand's width and pulling a hurt kid through a coolant cloud in under a minute. He looked at Kellui, and then he looked at Girl, standing at his shoulder easy, watching the fog with her head low. I've got the first one. You've got the second, you and whoever's got the guts. You go in on my word and you pull the second that corner lifts, and you do not wait to see if it holds, because it won't hold long. Rebreather. Someone threw one. Kellui caught it and had it on her face in the time it took to decide she was going to do this, which was no time at all, because she had crossed over months ago, and this was only the bill coming due. What happened next Kellui has told a handful of times, always the same, always to people who don't quite believe her. The human went into the fog. Not around it, into it, no rebreather, 1 breath held, straight to the pinned corner of the module, and he put his hands flat on the gray hide of Girl who came in with him. And he did the thing Thren had documented and no facility could teach, which was ask. He did not command her. He did not have a rig or a word of doctrine. He put his hands on her, and he said something Kellui was too far and the fog too thick to hear. And the sovereign set her shoulder against the low corner of a 4-ton module and pushed. Kellui had read the whole literature on sovereign predators. Nowhere in it, in any species study across a generation of a war program, was there a single line about a sovereign doing work, pulling, lifting, hauling, because no one had ever gotten a sovereign to do anything but kill and die. They were apex hunters. They did not draw carts. And here was 4 meters of graven death with its shoulder to a fallen module, straining. Because a small mortal creature it had decided to keep had put its hands on her and asked. And the module groaned. And the low corner came up, not a hand's width more. A clean 1/4 meter. The whole near stack shifting with a shriek of stressed alloy. And Kellui was already moving, already in the fog with the rebreather burning cold against her face. And she got her hands under the apprentice's arms and she pulled, and the kid came free, and Kellui hauled her back and out of the white into clean air where the maintenance crew took the weight. And behind her the human said one word she did hear this time, because he raised his voice for it. The only time in the whole season anyone heard Arlo Vance raise his voice, and the word was off. And the Sovereign came off the module, and out of the fog, and the stack came down the rest of the way behind her into the space where the apprentice had been, 4 tons into empty deck, and the human walked out of the coolant cloud on his own feet with his lungs half frozen, and a season's worth of the station's disbelief finally, completely spent, and he sat down hard on the clean deck and coughed white vapor and breathed, and girl folded down around him, and put her great head over his knees. And the 2 of them stayed like that while the medics ran for the apprentice, and the alarm wound down, and Dock 11, filled slowly with people who had come running and now stood, all of them, looking at the small human and the animal that had just done, for a stranger's child, a thing the entire literature said was impossible. The second impossible thing that season, and this time nobody was surprised, because they had learned by now that impossible was just the word their people used for the things the human did on an ordinary shift, without raising his voice, because he couldn't walk past. Sella lived, she kept her legs. She grew up to be a maintenance chief on the Sabak Reach, and she named her first hatched after nobody could ever quite get her to say who. And when she was old she told the story to apprentices of her own, and the apprentices did not believe her either. And she did not mind, because she had been the kid in the fog, and she knew exactly how much the not believing was worth, which was nothing, next to being pulled out alive. They asked him about it, finally, in the diner off the transfer concourse. On one of the rare shifts, the whole crew found itself off at once. It was Doff who asked, because Doff had lost the most money betting against him and had earned, by paying up without complaint, the standing to ask the thing nobody else quite dared. The diner was bright, late station afternoon light coming gold through the big concourse windows, and girl lay in the wide aisle by the door where she always lay when the human went somewhere with a door. And the diner's owner had long since stopped objecting, because the diner had never in its life been so full as it was on the shifts the Sovereign lay by the door. Arlo had a mug of something warm and was not drinking much of it. "I'll tell you what I don't understand," Doff said, "and I've thought about it a fair bit having paid for the privilege. You didn't know what she was. First day, the water fine, you're soft, you can't walk past a hurt thing. Some people are made that way, I'll grant it. But by the 3rd day, the officer told you flat what she was. Class Sovereign. Killed her own handlers, and you kept going. That's the part, not the soft part. The part where you knew and you went back anyway and put your hands in its mouth." The Bren's sulfur skin creased. "Where I come from, knowing is what stops you. You told the officer it's just where you're from. Well, I'm asking, what kind of a place makes a person go back knowing?" Arlo turned the mug a 1/4 turn on the table and was quiet, and the diner got quiet with him, because they had all wanted to ask it and Doff had only been the one with the standing. "My grandfather kept a dog when I was small," he said. "I told the officer about him. Captain. Big cream-colored thing, an Anatolian, bred for 6,000 years to stand between the flock and whatever wanted to eat it. Killed a leopard on our lease when I was 5, slept in my bed, both true." He turned the mug back. "What I didn't tell her is how Captain died because she didn't ask, and it's the part that matters." He looked up. "He got old, the way they do, and one hard winter he got a growth in his gut, and there wasn't a vet for 200 kilometers and no money for one if there had been, and he stopped eating, and he went off to die the way they do, walked out past the crawl wall one night in the cold to find a place. And my grandfather went out after him in the dark with a lantern, 70 years old, bad hip, and he found him. And he didn't drag him back, because you don't. And he didn't put him down, because Captain wasn't ready and my grandfather wouldn't decide that for him. He sat down in the frost next to that dog and he stayed. All night. He held his head. He talked to him low, the way you do, told him he was a good boy and he'd killed a leopard and he was the best dog on the Highveld, all of it, till the dog went. Then he carried him back at first light and buried him by the crawl wall, and he never said a word about the cold or the hip or the night, and I asked him, I was small, I asked him, why he went out there. Why not let the dog have his quiet? Why sit up all night in the frost for an animal that was going to die anyway? Arlo's thumb moved on the mug, and he said, because no one should have to do the last part alone. Not a man, not a dog, not anything. That's the whole of it, boy. You don't let a thing die alone if you can help it. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter that it's ending. You go out in the cold and you sit down and you stay, so the last thing it knows is that somebody came. The diner was silent. The gold light lay across the table. So that's the answer to your question, Arlo said to Dolph plainly. You asked what kind of a place makes a person go back knowing. That kind. A place where a 70-year-old with a bad hip goes out in the frost to hold a dying dog's head all night for no reason, but that no one should do the last part alone. That's not soft. Soft's got nothing to do with it. It's the hardest thing there is, sitting up with a dying thing, because dying's slow and it's cold and there's nothing in it for you and it breaks your heart every single time and you go anyway. He looked down at girl in the aisle, watching him from the doorway with her chin on her paws. When I saw her in that cage, I didn't see a sovereign. I saw a thing that had been left to do the last part alone. And I've been raised by people who don't allow that. So I went and I sat down. That's all it ever was. I wasn't brave and I wasn't soft and I didn't know a thing about apex predators. I just wasn't going to let her be alone for it. He almost smiled. She's the one who decided not to die. That part was hers. All I did was stay. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Pev, the galley cook, who almost never spoke, said quietly from the end of the table, "My people have a word for that," and did not offer the word, and none of them pressed him, and Kelly thought about the space Thren had left in the monograph where the word should go, and thought that maybe every people had the word and had only forgotten where they'd put it, and that a boy from a hard lease had walked onto a nowhere station, and reminded a whole dock of a word it hadn't known it was missing. Kelly changed her life over it, though it took her a while to admit that was what she was doing. She did not do anything dramatic. She did not quit the dockmaster's office or make a speech. But she asked quietly for a transfer off containment, off the arms locker and the impound orders and the humane death recommendations, onto the welfare desk, the new one. The one that had grown up around the monthly line item Asuk swore it hadn't written, companion animal sovereign. Welfare and provisioning, which had by now expanded, the way these things did once someone was actually minding them, into a small office that looked after every animal that came through the reach, the working beasts and the cargo creatures, and the ones that arrived dying in bad holds. She ran that office. She was good at it. Better than she'd ever been at containment, because it turned out that 11 years of learning exactly how a sovereign moved was 11 years of learning how to read an animal, and reading an animal when you were trying to help it instead of contain it was the whole job. She never told Arlo she'd done it because of him. She didn't have to. He came by the welfare office his last month on the station to sign some form about girls' transit papers, and he saw the sign on the hatch and the animals in the care pens behind her and the young Bren's rescued herd guardian dozing in a sunbeam. And he read all of it in about the time it took him to read anything, which was slow and complete. And he looked at her. And he didn't say congratulations, and he didn't say I'm proud of you, because he wasn't her grandfather and it wasn't his place. He just said, suits you better than the rifle did, and signed the form. And that was the most Kelly ever needed anyone to say about it. His contract ran out at the turn of the season, and Arlo did not renew it, and nobody was surprised, because a boy who had come to the reach to earn passage home had earned it, and a boy who could not walk past a dying thing was not a boy who belonged on a transfer station forever. He belonged on a lease somewhere with weather and stock and a fence line, and everyone who'd watched him for a season knew it. And so when the day came, they did the thing that a season before none of them would have imagined doing. They came to see him off. The paperwork alone had taken his whole last month, because moving a registered sovereign-class predator from a transfer station to a death world in the Sol system was not a thing any form had contemplated, and Kelly's welfare office and Thren's veterinary office, and even grudgingly, Asuk's administration had to invent the transit authority the way the arbiter had invented the guardianship, from nothing, because the facts required it. There were quarantine waivers and hazard exemptions and a coalition transit permit that Subdirector Ashanu's office, of all offices, quietly expedited, with a one-line note attached that Kelly kept, recommend approval. The directorate has no further interest. Some things are not ours to have. Which was, from the directorate, very nearly poetry and very nearly an apology, and as close as an institution built out of people who walked past would ever come to admitting it had watched a thing it should have stopped for and for once let it go on its way. The earthbound hauler docked at berth 9, the same dock. They'd arranged that on purpose, though no one would say who, at the bright end of a late morning shift, and its cargo ramp came down onto the deck where a season before a dying sovereign had lain in its own filth while the whole station walked the long way around, and the incongruity of that was not lost on anyone. The dock was full. Not cleared, full, the opposite of the day of the destruction order, full of dockhands and loaders and both off-duty containment officers, and the young Bren with his herd guardian on a lead and Pev in his apron and Doff with no book open and Thren and Kelly. And at the back, where it thought no one would read anything into it, the over-warden, 4 eyes cycling slowly, having found some administrative reason to be on Dock 9 at precisely the hour the human left. Arlo had one duffel. That was all he'd come with and all he was leaving with. A season of the most extraordinary events in the station's history, having added nothing to his luggage and everything to everyone else's. He shouldered it, and he stood at the foot of the ramp, and he looked back at the dock full of the people who had come. And he was, for the first time anyone could remember, a little at a loss, because he did not make speeches and did not know what you were supposed to say to a station that had learned a word from you and did not know it had. He didn't make a speech. He looked at them for a moment and he nodded once, the same nod he gave the animal, the one that meant you're all right, and then he turned to the ramp, and he said quietly the 2 words he'd said 10,000 times that season, the 2 words that had started all of it, back at a cage, over a bucket of water. With me, girl. And the sovereign rose. She had been lying at the edge of the crowd in a patch of dome light, easy, chin on paws, watching the ramp and the ship and the small human the way she watched everything. And at his word she came up off the deck in one unhurried motion, 4 meters of graven apex predator, the most dangerous animal in 40 light years. And the crowd drew its breath the way crowds still did, the old reflex, and then let it out, because she was not doing anything but standing, and standing was not anymore a thing they feared from her. She crossed the deck to the foot of the ramp. She stopped at the human's shoulder. And then she walked up the ramp of the earthbound hauler behind him, into the hold, as gently as a dog going up the porch steps at the end of a long day, and the brushed aluminum ramp rang softly under her weight, and that was the sound, more than any other, that the crew carried home from the day, the soft ringing of a ramp under a sovereign who was walking, calm and willing, up into a ship, at the quiet word of a boy who had never once made her do anything. Kelly had signed the order once to let that animal die alone in a welded box. She stood on the full dock and watched it walk freely up a ramp toward a world with weather and stock and a fence line, and she found that her eyes were doing a thing Coraline eyes did rarely, and she let them. The voyage home took 11 weeks, and the hauler's crew, who had signed on nervous about their cargo, spent the first of those weeks giving the hold a wide berth, and the last 10 of them, one by one, finding excuses to be near it. It was the same shape the Sabik Reach had gone through, run again in miniature. The hauler was a small ship with a small crew, a rough mixed lot who'd taken the charter for the hazard pay and expected to earn it, and they had been briefed on what rode in the aft hold, and they had rigged the hold with every containment the ship owned, and agreed among themselves to leave the human and his monster strictly alone. That lasted until the cook, there was always a cook, noticed that the boy carried the same buckets on the same schedule and talked to the thing the same low way, and got curious, and then got involved. And by the far end of the run the hauler's whole off-watch could be found, most evenings, sitting on cargo crates at a respectful distance in the aft hold, watching a 19-year-old set down a drum of water for a sovereign, quiet, the way you're quiet for a thing worth being quiet for. They had invented the setting of the drum all over again without ever having heard it named. People did, it turned out. Given the chance, given someone to watch, they mostly did. Earth cleared them through orbital quarantine after a fight that Kelly's paperwork won from 4 light-years away, and the drop shuttle set them down at a rough regional field in the dry highlands, and Arlo Vance came home the way he'd left, with one duffel, except that behind him down the shuttle ramp, onto the red dust of the Highveld under a hard white noon sun, came 4 meters of graven sovereign, blinking in the first real sunlight she'd felt in the whole of her recorded life. And the field crew who'd come to unload the shuttle stood very still, and then, being Highlands people who ran stock and dogs and did not spook easy, mostly just took their hats off, which on the Highveld is what you do when you don't have words. His family's lease was 200 kilometers up a dirt track, and they drove it in an old ground hauler with girl in the flatbed, and she rode it standing, into the wind, her head up over the cab, watching the country go by, the crawl walls and the thorn scrub and the far blue line of the escarpment, with an attention Arlo had only ever seen her give to threats, except this was not that. This was a thing looking at a wide, bright world for the first time, and finding it, apparently, worth the whole long look. He watched her in the mirror the whole way up and did not say anything, some things you don't narrate. His grandmother met them at the gate. She was old and small and weathered, and she had buried a husband by the crawl wall and raised a grandson hard, and she had gotten his messages across 4 light-years and had believed about half of them. And now, she stood at the gate of her lease and watched her boy climb down from the hauler and watched what climbed down after him. And she did the thing the field crew had done, which was go very still, and then she did a thing the field crew had not, which was walk up to 4 meters of the most dangerous animal in 40 light-years, an old woman with a bad knee and no fear left in her at her age, and look it in the eye from close, and hold out one weathered hand, palm down, the way you offer a hand to any dog so it can decide. And the sovereign lowered her great head, and breathed the old woman's hand, long, and then Arlo saw it and would tell it at his own table for the rest of his life. The sovereign leaned a fraction into the old woman's palm, the way girl leaned into nothing and no one but him, and the old woman rested her hand on the vast gray brow and said, to the animal, in the dry flat Highlands voice that had raised 2 generations of hard men and good dogs, "Well, aren't you a long way from home, girl? Come on then. There's water at the trough and shade under the pepper tree, and you look like you've had a time of it." She called her girl without being told the name. Arlo never got over that. He asked her later how she'd known, and his grandmother looked at him like he was simple and said, "What else would you call her?" And that was the end of it. And it was, when he thought about it, the same answer the whole galaxy had arrived at from 100 angles, that a thing you love and mean to keep gets called the plain small name, and the plain small name is bigger than any of the terrible ones the frightened give it from a distance. She took to the lease the way she had taken to the water, which was slowly and completely and on her own terms. The stock spooked at her for a week and then stopped, the way stock does, deciding in their dim collective way that the enormous gray thing that lay by the water trough was not a caracal and not a jackal, and did not, whatever their instincts screamed the first few days, appear to want them. And after that they grazed around her the way they'd grazed around old Captain a generation before, wary and unbothered at once. The family's 2 working dogs, half-feral Anatolians who feared nothing on 4 legs or 2, met her at the kraal on the first evening, and there was a bad quarter hour where the whole lease held its breath, the 2 big cream dogs stiff-legged and rumbling, and girls standing over them at 4 times their height. And then the older of the 2 dogs, the bitch, did the thing the vault hound had done in the dark on Dock 9, the thing the apex does when it meets the greater apex and is honest about it. She lowered her head and gave ground and lay down. And after that the 3 of them ran the fence line together at dusk, the 2 earth dogs and the graven sovereign, and the caracals and the jackals that had worked that lease for 6,000 years reached, collectively, over the following months, a firm new understanding about the eastern boundary, and the family did not lose a goat to a predator again for as long as the sovereign lived, which was a long time, because it turned out a sovereign off a death world. Watered and fed and loved, and given a wide bright country to lie in, lived a great deal longer than one dying alone in a hold. Arlo went back to the work he'd been raised to, the fences and the stock and the weather, and girl went with him the way she'd gone with him down the docks, 3 meters back, easy, always knowing where he was. The neighbors got used to her the way the docks had, which is to say never entirely, but enough. The regional vet, a practical woman who'd seen everything the Highlands could throw at her and nothing like this, came out to register the animal and stayed 4 hours and left shaking her head and telling nobody, because she'd figured out inside the first hour that no one would believe her and the boy plainly didn't want the fuss. Word got around anyway, the way it does. People drove the 200 kilometers of dirt track to stand at the gate and look, and Arlo let them look from the gate, and did not charge and did not perform, and mostly they went away quiet, having come to see a monster and found instead an old gray animal asleep under a pepper tree with a farm dog against its flank, and not knowing quite what to do with the difference. And in the end she did the thing that closed the circle, though Arlo never told anyone it had, because it was hers and it was private and some things you don't narrate. There was a night, the second winter, when one of the old ewes went down to lamb and could not, and it was cold and it was late, and it was going badly, and Arlo was out in the pen in the frost doing what could be done, which by the small hours was only the last thing his grandfather had taught him, which was to stay. And girl came out into the cold and lay down in the pen, on the frozen ground, the length of her against the dying ew's back, and put her great head down near the small terrified one, and stayed, all night. She who had been left to do the last part alone in a welded box, 4 light years and a lifetime ago, lay in the frost with a dying farm animal, so that it would not have to do the last part alone, and Arlo sat on the other side of the ewe with his hand on its neck, and looked at the sovereign across the small failing warmth of it, and understood that she had not learned this from him. She had learned it from the other side of it. She knew exactly what it was worth, being stayed with at the end, because once, when she was the one ending, somebody had come and sat down and stayed, and she had decided, in the way animals decide the things that matter, that this was a thing you did. The ewe did not make it. They buried her by the kraal wall in the morning, near the old grave, the one Arlo's grandfather had dug for a dog on a winter morning a lifetime before, and girl walked back to the house behind the boy through the thin gold light of the Highville dawn, unhurried, 3 meters back, and lay down under the pepper tree, and slept. That was the whole of it in the end. That was the thing the galaxy had walked the long way around, and the directorate had crossed 9 jumps to requisition, and the arbiter had invented a new box to name, and the doctor had left a blank space for in a monograph read across 9 systems. Not a weapon, not a method, not the most dangerous animal in 40 light years, though she was that too, and always would be, and everyone who was sensible knew it. Just an old gray thing asleep under a tree on a hard, bright world, who had once been dying and alone, and whom one ordinary person from a place where you don't walk past had knelt down beside and stayed with, and who had spent every day since paying it back, in the only currency that had ever mattered, to every small dying thing she could reach. They asked him sometimes, the ones who drove the long track to look, how he'd done it, what the trick was, what you had to be to walk up to a thing like that and live. He always told them the same, and he always told them plainly, because it was the truth and it was free, and it had cost him nothing but a bucket of water and an hour he had nowhere better to spend. Wasn't a trick, Arlo Vance would say, looking out at the old sovereign asleep in the shade. Everybody walked past her. I just didn't. That's the whole thing. You'd be amazed what stops being a monster the minute somebody stays.